everyone. Welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm Ann Morgan. I'm the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, and I'd like to welcome you all to this hybrid meeting of our board's budget subcommittee. I'd first like to acknowledge the land that we are on. We acknowledge that this land that we are on, as we hold this meeting, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The board acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. At this point, I'd like to ask, is there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, let me proceed. And I'll now turn it over to the board's Executive Director, Dr. Buchanan-Gisser, who will go over this meeting's logistics.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you everyone who has joined us in person, as well as those who have called into this meeting. Please note this meeting is also being live streamed on the Toronto Police YouTube account and will be available there at the conclusion of the meeting. Joining us in person, we have members of the board's budget subcommittee, Chair Morgan, board member Nadine Spencer, Vice Chair Lisa Kostakis is joining us virtually, as well as member Nick Migliori. We also have members of our board office staff, Chief Demkew, his command team, members of the service, and of course members of the public. We have individuals who have registered to make deputations, both in person as well as virtually, on our agenda item. As per our regular meeting process, deputations will be heard prior to the item being discussed and voted on by board members. When it comes time to do a deputation, those who have registered will be called upon or brought into the meeting. And as always, deputants will speak, followed by an opportunity for board members to ask them questions. Chair.
Thank you. We have a presentation first by Ms. Grant and a number of the command team. So we will start with that, and then afterwards we have a number of deputations from the community.
Thank you, Chair Morgan, and good morning, everyone. I'll maybe just kick it off before turning it over to Director Grant. So this is Budget Subcommittee number 2. If we could go to the next slide. Just in terms of level setting, sort of the role of the board and the service and kind of how the process works, the board's effectively responsible for the provision of adequate and effective police service for the municipality. And this is all sort of defined out in Section 399 of the PSA. If you can go to the next slide, please. And so under the PSA, the reason we do it in this way is that we submit an operating and capital budget and estimates and requirements of what we believe, the chief believes, is needed as the minimum required to maintain and show an adequate amount of service, equipment, facilities, and costs to the board for adequate and effective policing. And so this subcommittee, this is the second one. The goal is, the last one was some stage setting, and we talked about the history of the budget and kind of where we're at on our 2023 commitments. This meeting is actually going to focus on the services we deliver for this year and some of the unique challenges. And we'll set the stage a little bit for what our ultimate 2024 ask will be. And then the next meeting is where we will actually get into details about the number. And so the goal is for each meeting to sort of build one upon the other in order to make a case around what is required for adequate and effective policing. If we can go to the next slide, just a quick recap of what we talked about at the last budget subcommittee. So when we think of the budget history, we talked about how 5 out of the last 10 years, the Toronto police increase was in and around 0%, which also meant that the service absorbed the collective agreement impacts as well, which if you think of what then the resulting impact would be from a discretionary spend, from a staffing spend, we've effectively spent the last 10 years kind of in reduction mode, and it was reflected in the reduction of our officers, which right now are still 600 less than they were in 2010. The budget reductions over the last 10 years, if you compare that with the rate of inflation, it does translate to about $260 million in cost avoidance or in value or costs that have been absorbed within the service. In 2023, just as a reference, policing costs approximately $372 per resident per year. There is a Canadian benchmarking study that's been done. The Canadian median is 409. On both a gross and a net basis, the portion of the city's budget that makes up the overall City of Toronto budget has been declining since 2010. We take up 11% less of the total City of Toronto budget. In the same sort of period of time, so from 2010 to 2023, we've in fact grown as a city by 460,000 residents. That excludes the millions that come in annually to play, to work, to visit, to worship in the city. And during that same period, the officers deployed went down, about 600 officers or about 7.7%. So we've effectively grown to the size of the City of London that in and of itself requires about 600 officers to sort of manage their public safety landscape during a period where we went down 600. So the net gap is close to 1,500 if we wanted to maintain similar levels to 2010. We also, the other piece that we talk about a lot is city growth. We are expecting the city to grow in the next 2 years as much as it did in the last 7. So this is not, a slow and steady rate. This is now an accelerated rate of growth, and we're seeing that in our calls for service as well. And in that time, so speaking of calls for service, what we had talked about at the last meeting was that our emergency calls for service are up 19%. That exceeds the percent that we actually thought this year's calls for service would have been. And as a result of all of these sort of compounding factors, if we look at one of our most critical measures, which is our priority 1 response time, which is the time of the most urgent and serious calls, that has gone up from on average of 13 minutes in 2010, and at the end of 2023 it was 22 minutes, and it's ticked up a little bit since then. In order to kind of try and maintain and not further degrade service, we had a hiring plan this year around 911 operators, police officers, special constables. We're largely on track from a hiring standpoint. We do continue to face challenges from a retention, but we are on balance still, our commitment of being up 200 officers by the end of the year, we're essentially there. Retention and attrition is the thing that sometimes is higher or lower, but that's right now we are on track. From a hiring standpoint. But still, all of our growth assumptions surpassed what we had expected in terms of what would happen this year. And so what you'll see in the next series of slides is what is the 2023 reality from a service delivery standpoint. If we go, and so in terms of where we're at from a budget preparation standpoint, we are still in active discussions with the city. We know there are still active discussions with the province, and so there's a number of open levers that we are still working on fast and furiously over the next couple weeks to close in order to arrive at our final sort of budget ask. What we do know is we have a general idea. We know our hiring plan, we know our pressures, we know where we want to make the investments. And so at the next meeting, our goal is to present at least an upper limit of what our ask is with any other remaining levers discussed and with options. So the plan is by the end of the year, we will have a board-approved budget that will go into the city's process starting in January. We are spending this month and next month also participating and in some of the city's consultation processes as well. With that, and then, so the next slide, I think also it's important to highlight, more than any other year is the uniqueness of the City of Toronto. And we haven't highlighted it in this way in past budget submissions, but I think it's really important as we think of what the City of Toronto means in the national interest, in its provincial interest, and for the city. We are the 4th largest city in North America. We don't have any close Canadian competitor. Even when we provide jurisdictional scans on COP to POP, when we look at number of events, there really is no other comparator that has the dynamics that the City of Toronto has. You know, just as a few examples to highlight, consulate. So 87 out of the 108 consular offices in Ontario are actually located in Toronto. That lends itself to a much higher degree of rallies, of protests, of demonstrations, of unplanned events. And we saw that in this last board meeting as we talked about last week around Project Resolute and the effort that that's taken. Because we're along the 401, we have a much higher degree and share of many crime types. So as an example, human trafficking, 22% of the human trafficking that happens in Canada happens in Toronto. There is also a similar sort of statistic around carjackings. A much higher portion, even in the province, actually happen in Toronto. It also lends itself for Toronto being the largest hub around gun and gang crime. We also, you know, as being a world-class city, we have over 250 events that are sort of corporate in nature with the city that are planned. But in actuality, when you think of the planned and unplanned events overall, you will hear we do over 2,300 of them in a year, unmatched for any other Canadian city. And that also includes our entertainment district, one of the largest in Canada. And so all of these pieces, I think, is important when we think of our partnership with other levels of government and what the City of Toronto means. It surpasses, there's a municipal interest, but it also extends to the province and the feds as well.
Chair, if I may just put a little more of a finer point on that, and I think, you know, it's important to recognize we're a city that polices in an international environment. We see the impact of geopolitical events worldwide in our city on a regular basis, and it's reflected certainly in part because of the consular presence, but it's also a city that has an incredible representation of diasporas from around the world that come and live in harmony in our city and expect and deserve a certain type and level of policing, and with that comes a certain responsibility on us. So we do police in an international environment, and I think in things like vehicle thefts, for example, we're seeing that more and more. Canada is seen as a source country for stolen cars traveling abroad to fuel organized criminality. The reality is the number of stolen cars in this city far exceeds other jurisdictions, and the ability for us, for example, to disrupt and dismantle the networks that profiteer from that organized criminality and give Canada a reputation that we do not take pride in is important for us to highlight as a key operational imperative for us to be able to be resourced and be able to respond to. I think the other part is we are a city on our waterway that has a great amount of pressure on it, and we're in fact on an international border on that waterway. And unlike other jurisdictions, it causes complexity for us, an operational consideration that is unique in the City of Toronto, and we're a city with a waterway that is enjoyed by tens of thousands of people every day, and we have to provide safety and security in that space as well. So just a little more insights into what does make Toronto uniquely different, and it really is, in the landscape of Canadian policing, a unique city with unique dynamics. We do have Canada's baseball team. We do have Canada's basketball team. And while we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, may perhaps in my heart be Canada's team, there are other NHL teams. But when we consider that, we draw people from across this country to our entertainment district because we have, major sporting events that are representative of our entire nation. So that is uniquely different.
Chief, apropos, I wonder if I could just ask one more question. From what I've read, the City of Toronto basically generates half the GDP of the entire country. So essentially, would it be fair to say when you've talked about, the diversity, the needs, the waterfronts, is essentially both the mayor, the City of Toronto, and yourself, you're managing really a small country in terms of its demands?
Chair, I think that's very safe to say, and I think, when you think of the context of we're also the provincial capital, we are in fact a capital region in that regard as well, which I think reflects exactly what you're saying. And we've seen our provincial capital region draw attention that is similar or exceeds at times other capital cities, and certainly even Ottawa. So I think that's an excellent point.
Thank you, Chief.
With that, I'll turn it over to Director Grant to continue the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, CAO Dhaliwal. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start with an introduction to our service-based budget approach, and this is an initiative that we began in 2021 that allows us to present our budget by the services that we provide, in addition to all of the line-by-line information that we previously provided. And these services are supported by metrics and outcomes for each of those. And it allows us really to clearly articulate the value of the services that we are providing to the citizens of Toronto. But more importantly, it allows us to facilitate strategic conversations around the trade-offs in the service levels when setting priorities and funding levels, not only among the services that we provide, there would be trade-offs with limited amount of money, but also in the context of the overall city budget when the city is deciding which municipal services to invest in when they set their budget. In our service-based budget, we've defined 6 key service areas that are providing services really from a customer-centric viewpoint. This is from the perspective of those receiving our services. And for each of these categories, we've allocated our budget and resources and metrics and outcomes. Looking at the services, the first 2, 911 response and patrol, and investigations and victim support, are our 2 largest services, and they comprise almost 75% of the services that we deliver. We also deliver crime prevention, which represents 12% of our budget, and as well as events and protests, traffic and parking enforcement, and courts and prisoner management. And in support of this initiative, you can see at the bottom of the slide, we've established a team for each of these service categories. And this includes a sponsor for the service, a service lead, and support from our analytics and innovation and our budget and financial analysis teams. And it's really a truly collaborative approach to drive better outcomes for each of these services that we're delivering. This is an illustrative slide that shows when new priorities emerge, it's important that we're able to pivot on the dynamic needs of a unique city. But this does involve trade-offs. Resources need to be drawn for to address things like the Middle East conflict with the establishment of Project Resolute. With rising hate crimes, we've established a hate crime task force. And the growing concern over violent car thefts, in response to that, we established a provincial carjacking task force. But with critical staffing shortages, it is necessary to redeploy staff, and this does come at a cost to the service levels in those areas. We have experienced in some areas increased response times to calls for service. Also, the impacts, the ability to carry on with investigations and close cases for some of our units that we've drawn from, like sex crimes and homicide. It also contributes to case backlogs, and essentially it lengthens the time to deliver services where officers are pulled from. In the next part of our presentation, we are going to hear from each of our service leads that we have sitting here at the front table. And these are leaders in our organization that have hands-on understanding of the day-to-day delivery of those services, including the outcomes that we are striving towards, the challenges, the trends that are impacting those service delivery, and just how well we are doing. And our first presenter will be Superintendent Justin Vanderheyden. He's going to present our 911 response and patrol, but before I do that, I'm going to turn it over to CA Dhaliwal to introduce the subway map concept.
So I'll take that one. This whole endeavor has been building over years to think of the Toronto Police Service more as a service delivery organization and less as an institution. And in so doing, what we need to do is become more transparent and be metering ourselves more precisely in order to give the transparency that the public is looking for. This has been spearheaded through race-based data, missing and missed, and other community-engaged panels. So this subway map was a way that we used to explain to the public how policing works and in order to engage them and help them understand how race-based data and race equity issues might occur and how we might resolve them within the service. Justin, I think back to you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. As a lifelong resident, I appreciate the subway map. It certainly looks familiar to me, so it certainly resonates. I'll start with the 911 response patrol. 911 response patrol starts before the lights and sirens go on. It really starts when a Toronto Police communications operator connects to the next emergency call and immediately asks, "Emergency, do you need police, ambulance, or fire?" It's about the call taking, the dispatch, and all the response that is required. And it doesn't always mean a marked Ford Explorer with 2 uniformed officers will arrive. Officers may arrive on bicycles, on foot, in a boat, riding a horse, or on a motorcycle. Most of the time they're in uniform, but sometimes they may come from specialized units in tactical gear, plain clothes, and may be driving unmarked cars or trucks. Regardless, the response should be timely and appropriate, providing assistance to those in need and addressing those needs in the most appropriate way possible. Next slide. This is a slide I introduced during last year's budget process. It represents the life cycle of an emergency call from the time someone dials 911 until the time the event is concluded. The Toronto Police Service is the Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP, for all emergency services in Toronto, and the busiest of its kind in Canada. The service received approximately 2 million calls for service over the past 12 months, which, as I will explain in a later slide, is a significant increase over the year before. 65% of those calls received are emergency calls to 911. In 2023, if you were to call 911, the average wait time was 55 seconds. The National Emergency Numbers Association, or NENA, standard for 911 is for 90% of emergency calls to be answered within 15 seconds, and 95% of calls to be answered within 20 seconds. The Toronto Police meets this voluntary standard, but more often we do not. Many times in the last year, a 911 operator would answer immediately, but too many times, say on a busy Friday or Saturday night in the summer, you might have to wait on hold for several minutes. This is a direct byproduct of the volume of calls being received by the call center and the number of communications operators that are working at that given moment. After the call is answered, you've explained your emergency, whether you need police, ambulance, or fire, or sometimes all three, the call is sent to a dispatcher in one or all of the emergency services. Often this occurs while you're still on the line with the call taker. If you need police, a police dispatcher is given your call for dispatching. It is as of this moment, which is point number 2 on this continuum, the pending clock starts. I'll expand on the impacts of pending time and the variables that can extend this time in a later slide. Once a police unit is assigned, and that's point number 3 on the continuum, the pending clock stops and the traveling time starts and ends once the first officer arrives to bring the emergency to a conclusion. This makes up the entire timeline from first contact to conclusion. Next slide. This slide demonstrates a very stable and predictable relationship between population growth and emergency calls for service in Toronto. As our city's population has grown, so too has the pressure on the 911 call center and response times. While there has been a 26% increase in emergency calls, that's the dark blue on the left chart, in the 7 years between 2015 and 2022, this number has accelerated substantially in just the last year, as seen on the chart on the right. The year-to-date numbers so far in 2023 indicate that emergency calls have already risen by over 18% since the same time period in 2022. This slide demonstrates response times to Priority 1 emergencies relative to staffing levels. The graph shows the inverse relationship between the red line number of available police officers and the gray bars showing the response time it takes to arrive on the scene of an emergency call in minutes. As you can see, this time has steadily increased from 12.8 minutes on the left in 2010 to over 22 minutes on the right in 2023. In that time, emergency calls for service have increased steadily and predictably in relation to population growth, but the number of uniformed officers has dropped from just over 5,600 to just over 5,000 as of today. The green line is a projection of how many officers it would require to have maintained the ratio of police officers relative to emergency calls, and presumably to maintain the 12.8-minute response time. This green line projection would require 6,500 police officers as of today, almost 1,500 more than are currently available. It bears noting that these response times are all in relation to our most serious calls, our Priority 1 calls, the most urgent calls where harm is actually occurring, where a serious crime is in progress. Think persons with guns, shootings, child apprehensions, serious car accidents. Not surprisingly, calls that are classified as Priority 2 calls take longer to respond to. But there's still emergencies where the potential for danger, harm, or violence exists or is imminent or has already occurred but has ended. Think abductions, robberies, overdoses, and persons in crisis. These are all commonly classified as Priority 2 calls. In 2015, the response to these calls was 38 minutes. That time rose to 59 minutes in 2022, and so far this year, the average response time to a Priority 2 emergency call is 64 minutes. Next slide. This slide is really where uniform staffing levels and response time come together in a tangible way. Remember in the timeline of an emergency call in my first slide I mentioned pending time? The timer starts once a dispatcher receives an emergency call, but the lack of available units causes these calls to stay pending for longer and longer, and not surprisingly has a massive impact on emergency response times, which is what this slide illustrates. You can almost ignore the blue bars. They represent travel time. Lights and sirens make this a fairly consistent number in the city once a unit becomes available. There's not much that can be improved there. Pending time, the yellow bar, however, is a direct result of having no units available to dispatch. A shocking 60% of emergency calls received by a dispatcher in the last year were met with no units available to send. This drives the pending time up and increases our response times to over double what they could be if every time an emergency call was received, there was an available unit to respond. When there are no units available, it takes an average of over 31 minutes before the first police car arrives on scene to a Priority 1 call. To show how much faster we could respond when there are units available to the dispatcher immediately, which only occurs 40% of the time, that response time is cut down to about 1/3 at just over 11 minutes. This response time is in line with other major Canadian cities' response times. This is the standard that one could expect if the available units were maintained in line with the emergency call volumes. The next 4 slides are about the Gerstein and the Toronto Community Crisis Service. I will go over them. They're fairly labor-intensive slides. The first one is in relation to the Gerstein Embedded Crisis Worker Program. I discussed this program during last year's budget process. As you've heard in other presentations, the program continues to be a source of inspiration and a demonstration that alternate response to person in crisis are possible. Anytime a person in crisis call comes into the TPS call centre, they are considered for diversion to speak to a Gerstein crisis worker that is co-located in our centre. While the numbers of actual diversions represent fairly small numbers, 3.3% of all person in crisis calls and 0.027% of all calls attended, it's important to remember that this is not a lift and shift cost-saving program, but a commitment to providing harm reduction supports and safer outcomes for persons in crisis as often as we can. One notable requirement of this program is that the person that is calling the call centre must consent to a non-police response. In a significant number of possible diversions, the caller declined the call diversion option. This is the Toronto. The next 2 slides are in relation to a similar alternative service delivery area coordinated by the city. The Toronto Community Crisis Service, or TCCS, is a city-led program nested within the SAFE-TO framework for community safety and well-being. The program seeks to divert callers to anchor crisis support agencies and actually send a non-police response to the scene to provide community-led response that is person-centered, trauma-informed, and focused on harm reduction. TPS considers all incoming calls that involve persons in crisis for a TCCS response, and after a screening process, which also includes the consent of the caller is soft transferred to 211, meaning that the TPS call taker remains on the line. If there is any indication of violence or potential for violence, the call is not eligible for diversion. In over 5,800 cases that passed the screening process, the TCCS was offered by TPS call takers. 3,600 accepted, but over 1,000 of those ended up coming back to the TPS for one reason or another, and still requiring a police response. Currently, just over half of the Toronto Police Divisions are covered by TCCS, but this has recently been approved to expand citywide. While the total number of calls, annual calls, are slightly different in this slide compared to the Gerstein slide, that's because the dates of analysis were slightly different. The overall percentage of persons in crisis calls that have a non-police response remain relatively small. Less than 1% of all calls received that were attended by TCS were diverted. However, when we only look at persons in crisis calls, an encouraging 6.9% of all those calls were successfully diverted from a police response, and this is in line with the range of opportunity of comparable programs. The range of opportunity for a program of this nature, even in other jurisdictions, is a diversion rate of 6 to 8% of all calls for persons in crisis. But the overall impact on the volume of work is effectively a reduction of 1%, and sadly that is quickly absorbed by the steadily increasing rates of calls for service in Toronto. While these programs are a source of hope, better public safety, and individual health outcomes, they do not represent a lift and shift or a cost-saving measure. These programs are all about providing the most appropriate response as often as we can. The Gerstein and TCCS are two examples of the programs of some of the alternate service delivery approaches that we're committed to. The Auditor General was quite clear that more resourcing was needed in areas of 911, call taking, dispatching, and priority response, given that response times and service levels continued to degrade. Here are some of the themes that the Auditor General recommended that we are currently working on: answering calls, assigning call event types and priority levels, dispatch and response times to emergency events, new technology, 911 levies, and other opportunities, and fifth and finally, community education and awareness. And as you see on the right side of the slide, there are next steps to get to those goals. Director Grant.
Thank you, Superintendent. So given everything that you've heard on 911 response, I'm going to wrap up this section with priorities investments needed in the budget to address these challenges. And so the budget will continue with our commitment to build and strengthen our call diversion partnerships with Gerstein and Toronto Community Crisis Centre to provide the right services and the best possible outcomes for persons in crisis. We will continue to work and support the city programs such as SafeTO, and also our commitment is very important to implementing the AG's recommendations on 911 response and priority calls for service. But certainly the most significant priority in this budget continues to be addressing response times that have increased beyond what would be considered acceptable. And this is also an observation that the AG made in her report. As mentioned, we're continuing to see growth in calls for service and workload, along with critical staffing shortages, and this has resulted in response times that exceed 22 minutes. Really, the next worst response time in Canadian Police Services that we're aware of is almost half of that at 12 minutes, and most services in Canada range from 6 to 11 minutes in response times. So this budget includes increased staffing that would build capacity with the goal to at least maintaining our response times amid all of the growth and demands. We also include an investment to increase supervision to address gaps that have occurred due to the understaffing. And these added resources are also intended to improve member wellness and to reduce burnout. And for our next service presentation, I am going to turn it over to Inspector Susan Gomes to talk about investigations and victim support.
Good morning. Upon receiving any source of information that requires investigation, it is expected to be initiated by appropriately qualified investigators, ensuring the needs of the victims are first and foremost in their approach, limiting further victimization and reducing overall criminality. The Ontario Police Services Act outlines many basic principles around public safety and victim support. We are obligated under the Act to provide appropriate investigative services and respectful victim assistance, understanding their needs. The level of involvement through investigations is not only about the chase or the solving of the puzzle, catching the offender, but it also includes the arduous and most often longest duration of putting a case before the courts. Case management is inclusive in the measurement of success. The following service map identifies the steps when police are involved with individuals in response to events. Investigations and victim support activities related to direct involvement with individuals in response to events are identified in color. Investigating crimes, investigations can range from less serious crimes to intense criminal investigations, such as organized crime, financial crime, drug and sex crimes, homicides and missing persons, robberies and gun and gang-related crimes that require specialized response from investigators who have accredited and specific related training and experience. Investigators attend scenes of crime, analyze and document the scene, identify victims and witnesses, identify, find, arrest and charge suspects, secure, process, collect, and evaluate evidence to present to court. In investigation-related activities, investigators are involved in several ancillary activities related to investigations. These include participation in prosecutions and court proceedings, for example, create and serve subpoenas, complete and submit disclosure documents in a timely manner, manage victims and witnesses, and attend court to testify. They ensure compliance of court orders, provide training, expertise for both internal and external entities, and provide relevant information and education to communities pertaining to public safety and inform crime prevention. For victim support, when a member of the public or their family is impacted by one of these crimes, victim support is provided by investigators through liaising with victims and their families throughout the entire investigative process, beginning with the initial investigation and including the court process and quality of life recovery. Victim support services include identification of all levels of victimization, including peripheral victims, engagement with victims with a trauma-informed lens and approach, and an introduction of required supports such as Victim Services Toronto, regardless of victims' decision to participate in the criminal justice system. Year after year, we see, in spite of resource challenges, great work continues to get done. Just a few headlines are captured here where you can see positive community impact. In addition to these headlines, I will add that this year we had success in solving 4 cold case investigations using investigative genetic genealogy, 2 homicides from 1983 and 2 sexual assault cases from 1990 and 1993. The Financial Crimes Unit investigated complaints against the Ontario Police Public Safety News, a magazine purporting to be affiliated with legitimate police services and widely distributed across the province. The now accused targeted the public and small business owners across the province for donations and advertisement costs. The Gun and Gang Task Force initiated an investigation into a group of individuals suspected of illegal firearm sales in the Toronto area. A collaboration with the London Police Service led to seizure of 24 illegal firearms. The drug squad made a single largest drug seizure in history with a total of 992 kilograms of illicit drugs worth $90 million. As we are well aware, the landscape of policing has changed, particularly in Toronto. With new technology comes the explosive growth in digital evidence, in addition to all those specific to increase in our calls for service, as laid out earlier in this presentation and what makes Toronto unique. This slide demonstrates that overall major crimes are up 18% since 2015. Comparing last year to this year specifically, we are up 20%. The largest increase is seen in auto thefts by almost 200%. Of the occurrences reported to police in Toronto, the proportion of violent crimes to nonviolent crimes is increasing. The Violent Crime Severity Index for Toronto increased by over 15% in 2022, which is 3 times more the rate of increase seen nationally. At Canada-wide, it was 4.6%, and twice the rate of increase seen provincially in Ontario was 6.7%. As far as shootings, and not shown here, between April the 1st and the end of September this year, in just 6 months, our Gun and Gang Task Force Community Safety Response Team members responded to 187 shooting incidents. From this, there has been a 44% solve rate, with 26 firearms seized and 64 persons arrested. 94 referrals were made on behalf of the victims of these shootings, ensuring access to appropriate community support services like Victim Services Toronto, Victim Witness Assistance Program, Children's Aid Society, and the Toronto Community Housing. If we look at these tiles outlining additional crime data, we can see significant impacts. I'll speak further to just a few. Hate crime, currently we're experiencing 43% in reported hate crimes year to date compared to that same last year. The number of hate crimes has increased from 224 in 22 to 320 23. This is in part as a result of the current Middle East conflict, as you would have already heard by Chief Demke last week in a media conference as well as a board meeting. And human trafficking, as per the Canadian Centre of End Human Trafficking, 87% of reported human trafficking cases occurred in large urban centres like Toronto. Toronto Police Service is part of the Provincial Human Trafficking Intelligence-led Joint Forces Strategy, which successfully assisted 61 victims of human trafficking and laid 239 charges against 28 people since the strategy formed in 2021. Fraud has increased by 46% from 2015. Comparing 2022 year-to-date stats to 2023, there is an increase of 20.5%. In 2022, fraud-related losses totaled $531 million Canada-wide, and as of June 2023, there have been over $283 million lost to fraud. In the last 6 months, we've investigated over $152 million in reported fraud losses from 8,400 cases, which is more than half of what is reported nationally. We started 2023 with 155,000 open cases related to the major crime indicators since 2015 to 2022. These numbers do not reflect all other crime types and their related cases such as child exploitation, frauds, sexual offenses, and firearm-related offenses, to name a few. In the areas of highest open cases, like auto theft, we are still expected to do our best in closing them. In these cases, although on their face it appears to be only related to a property crime and not related to personal physical injury crime, victims have been profoundly impacted, requiring the same amount of care and attention and follow-up with appropriate community support services. Victims afraid to return to their homes after a stranger has broken in, or their vehicle stolen, where that vehicle is the means of their employment or livelihood, all equally jeopardize their quality of life. As the major crime indicators rise year over year, it continues to add to the burden of the increase of workload on our investigators and support staff. Time is required to close a case. Resources are required to fill the time efficiently. Most investigative offices currently have unfilled vacancies through natural attrition from investigators and specialists to supervisors and support staff without replacements, provided given other service priorities and demands for personnel resources elsewhere. With the added workload, related pressures, and additional responsibilities of absent investigative teammates and vacancies, negative consequences arise, such as burnout requiring psychological breaks and wellness pauses by investigators, causing further cyclical effect on personnel shortages and prolonging investigations. New cases are added while older cases continue to require attention. Complexity of cases is generally increasing, so each investigation requires more time. What was once taken care of by first responders at the time of the call for service, like video canvassing and peripheral witness contact, is held pending the follow-up of an assigned investigator, slowing the process of first instance evidence gathering. Demands related to court preparation and the management of cases through the court process requires additional time. Requirements for prosecutions are regularly increasing. For example, as stated earlier, ever-increasing volumes of video evidence require manual review for redactions. The type of investigations conducted for various crimes can vary tremendously. Some cases are quickly addressed, solved, and prosecuted. In other instances, investigations may be time-consuming and lengthy. Charging the accused may have specific issues such as interjurisdictional investigations. Court proceedings may be prolonged and ultimately unsuccessful. This creates challenges in determining optimum staffing levels and time required per investigation. This past year, we have seen a notable reduction in availability of court staff, resulting in courtroom closures. As a result, some cases before the court have been delayed or thrown out, increasing the length of time to resolve cases, ultimately creating a further negative impact on the victim.
Thank you, Inspector. And now there are investments required in the budget to address investigative capacity and service gaps in this area. Similar to 911 services, we are experiencing a lack of resources amid growing workloads and demands for service. And we do have vacancies in our specialized operations that are causing a decline in our capacity to investigate. So this all translates to challenges in terms of our ability to close cases and challenges with the increase increase in the backlog of the number of open cases. Every hour of the day, the Toronto Police Service collects 100 hours of video evidence, and this has really grown exponentially. It took us a decade, really, to hit a petabyte of storage from 2010 to 2020, but really from 2020 to 2023, with the introduction of body-worn camera, we hit our second petabyte of data storage. Investment in resources are required for successful case outcomes, with 10 times the video that we had in the last decade and backlogs of over 13,000 cases for redaction and disclosure. This is creating delays for the Ministry of the Attorney General and impacting our ability to bring cases through the justice system. And there are investments needed so that we can get families and victims and families of those victims closure, and also prevent further victimization, because time matters. And there is a very human aspect to the impact of delays in justice. And finally, our budget also includes funds to implement recommendations by Justice Epstein for the missing persons cases. Okay, and our next service area is crime prevention, and I'd like to introduce Inspector Paul Rinkoff. He is the service lead for this area. Paul?
Good morning. It's important to begin by noting that crime prevention is a legislative responsibility of every police officer, every policing unit, and corporally, it is a responsibility of the Community Partnership and Engagement Unit, where I work, to make sure we are all working together and feeling supported across the service as we engage with our communities in crime prevention initiatives. What may look like a colorful dartboard on your screen is actually our community safety and well-being planning framework. This graphic illustrates how the province, our city, and service views and breaks down crime prevention and community safety practices. These shared practices and subsequent partnership of our service with SafeTO and city-led agencies stems from the legislated Community Safety and Policing Act that mandates all municipalities to exercise a 10-year safety plan. The red in the center represents incident response, describing how we as a service respond to immediate calls for service. However, the yellow, blue, and green circles represent risk intervention, or downstream, prevention, or midstream, and social development, or upstream. Crime prevention focuses on the up, mid, and downstreams. These streams represent long-term multidisciplinary efforts and investments to improve social determinants of health and reduce harm, victimization, and the propensity to commit crime. It's this area of crime prevention where we consider evidence-based activities, multi-sectoral collaborations to address Torontonians of acutely elevated risk. It's also where we leverage our SafeTO relationships to coordinate and strategize with the city, with schools, with the TTC, and with public health, to name a few. Why is this important? Getting upstream allows us to find the right help and supports for those at risk, and ultimately prevent crime, which eventually reduces demand on primary response, on neighborhood officers, on high-demand resources such as MCIT, on investigative resources, ultimately improving community safety while empowering communities and promoting resiliency. Next slide. Okay, this slide's good. So is this approach effective? I'm going to highlight 4 of many best-in-class, innovative, collaborative, and co-led programs that make the Toronto Police a leader in crime prevention initiatives and outcomes. These programs come with metrics to demonstrate their impact in our communities. So the first program you'll see on your left, that's youth diversion, and that is completely upstream. We're intervening with youth who commit offenses, and we're diverting them from a justice system which we know can contribute to further involvement in criminality as opposed to rehabilitation. If you take a look at the second program, that's Focus Toronto. Focus is a flagship program for our service. This is a multi-sector co-led prevention and intervention focus program involving City of Toronto and United Way, which involves the referral of acutely high-risk individuals. And looking at the numbers, we're up to almost 1,000 referrals this year to approximately 170 specialized community agencies. And To note, 74% of those referrals come from members of the Toronto Police Service. It's a grassroots street-level program and has recently been recognized globally at the United Nations for its effectiveness. And here's an interesting fact. When we talk about the value of getting upstream, an independent academic review of Focus showed that individuals who were referred were 69% less likely to have future contact with the police. This again translates to less demand on police resources today. The third program I'd like to highlight is our Crime Stoppers program. This is a best-in-class co-led program here in Toronto, and if you look at 2023 to date, we've had almost 5,400 tips. What you don't see on this slide is that for every 1,000 tips, we see about 14 arrests made. That in 2022, there were 881 charges laid as a result of tips. And how about this? $1 million worth of drugs seized as a result of tips in 2022, and clearing 123 investigative cases in the same year. So again, reducing demand on our investigative resources, another worthwhile upstream investment. And the fourth program, our Neighborhood Officer Program. A large group of embedded, culturally sensitive, highly trained officers who focus on co-developing solutions to community programs. They really are community ambassadors and operate with a neighborhood community officer mindset, investing in relationships and community-based opportunities. The program is under regular, independent academic evaluation and represents a flagship community policing program for the service. NCOs have referral access to just under 300 partner agencies, not including those they access from Focus. I will discuss NCO resources in the next slide. However, before I do, I should note there are several other community-focused intervention and prevention programs that are operating across our service, including MCIT, Community Connect, ProAction, the Military Veterans Program, Medenta Mending a Crack in the Sky, and Engage 416. Many of these programs are supported by our division and specialized units, our community police liaison committees, and our community consultative committees. These are, again, upstream programs that promote social development, and I also must recognize our volunteer auxiliary officers who volunteer their time to support crime prevention and education initiatives all year round. The next slide, please. So, if you look at this geographic map of the city, you'll note there are there are 158 City of Toronto defined neighborhoods. Currently, 52 out of 158 have assigned neighborhood officers. And this year, our service is committed to adding 4 neighborhoods, translating to 16 additional NCOs in our city. A common question that is often posed, what would it take to roll out NCOs to all of our neighborhoods? And the last box in the right corner there speaks to that number, approximately 400 NCOs. Behind the scenes, we are very fortunate to have neighborhood community officer leadership team that is committed to best-in-class training, and this includes community-based problem-solving techniques and cultural sensitivity training. What we hear time and time again from our communities, from community representatives, organizations, and community leaders, we love our NCOs and we want more. Next slide, please. So to better understand the work of our NCOs and how they're doing, and the work they're doing upstream, midstream, and downstream, when it comes to crime prevention, we as a service have developed a community referral app which is linked to a dashboard that can be viewed by managers and leaders across the organization. This app was developed with the NCO as the end user in mind, with support from our CIO and Humber College. Some of the trends you will note: referrals are proactive about 68% of the time. And you'll also note that a number of referrals are made off-duty. Why is that important? Why do I mention it today? It just demonstrates the level of commitment and connection that our NCOs have with their communities and neighborhoods, regardless whether they're working or not. Referrals are accepted in the majority of time by community members, and the top community issues that are being supported by NCOs include housing, addiction, mental health, followed by drug use. The focus of NCOs is not to police communities, but provide opportunities. They identify complex community problems and co-develop solutions with community members. Let me leave you with some examples. Over the past year, NCOs have facilitated opportunities by demand to youth, such as first aid and babysitting training, resume writing, and interview skills. Initiatives that are designed to build resiliency and empower Toronto residents. Again, these are upstream solutions intended to deliver safer communities. In sum, the service supported by the Community Partnership and Engagement Unit represents a toolbox of crime prevention programs and initiatives, all of which have been co-developed with the community to build stronger relationships and improve community safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inspector. And moving on to the fourth category of services, which is events and protests. Joining us today is the Service Lead, Inspector Dave Eklund.
Good morning and thank you. The topic I will be discussing today is events and protests. Events can be categorized by two types, corporate events and special events. A corporate event is a large-scale event that happens on a yearly basis and requires resources from across most units within the TPS. A special event can be smaller in scale and may only require the resources from one or a few divisions. A protest or a demonstration is typically politically motivated and may also involve resources from either one or two divisions, but could require hundreds of officers from across the city, depending on the size, scale, and emotion of the protest. Most protests are very peaceful, while some protests can involve violence, hate crimes, and mischief. While we distinguish the difference by definition of events and protests for tracking, planning, and resource allocation purposes, there is a common element between all, and that is the public's expectation of and need for safety. Safety is also our desired outcome. Everyone who comes to our city, whether you live here, work here, come to a parade, run a marathon, attend a cultural festival, or even come to protest for a cause, everyone has the expectation that in doing so, they will feel and be safe. And that is the product we deliver, and we do it well. So far in 2023, the Toronto Police Service has managed the safety and security for 3,600 special events and protests, which is a significant increase over the 2,082 that we managed in 2022. 8 different city divisions issue permits for events. City Transportation, as well as Parks, Forestry, and Recreation are just 2 of these city divisions. It is very important that the Toronto Police Service has a seat at the permitting table and planning table to provide feedback on police resources availability prior to the issuing of a permit. For example, in the summer of 2022, a permit was issued for a running event by City Transportation in which the route went through a park, where Parks, Forestry, and Recreation had issued a permit for an Art in the Park installation. Slide 2. When we as a service deliver our product of safety, it requires resources. There's extensive planning involved. Sometimes there is testing of that plan. There is the gathering of information to identify potential threats. There are public order plans, traffic plans, and operational plans, and even an event management plan. For large events, this work is done by my unit, Emergency Management and Public Order, or EMPO. For smaller events, this work is done by a divisional planner and supported by EMPO. The event happens, resources are required from across the city for public safety, and when these resources are used, other things are not being done. So if we think of a fish tank full of goldfish and water, the general population of Toronto and the requirements for the police and safety are the goldfish, and the police are the water. Then you have a large glass with 1 goldfish in it that also requires water of its own for a period of time. We simply don't go to a tap and turn on the water to fill up that glass to help that 1 goldfish. We have to take the water to the larger tank and put it in that glass. That means there's less water for the group of fish in the larger tank. Once that single fish in the glass no longer needs that water can be then poured back into that larger tank. But for a moment in time, and often for protracted moments in time, there's less water for the larger school of fish. And that single fish in that glass can represent so many things. It represents anything that takes away the water from the rest of the fish. It can be events and protests, and even the required training so we can continue to provide that fresh, clean, and safe water to all the fish. In the first weekend of May 2022, EMPO tracked calls for service and pending times. Coming out of the pandemic, there were many planned events for that weekend which required policing resources to ensure public safety. To have the resources necessary, we moved divisional officers from evenings and night shift to work days to cover the many events of one of the first really nice days of that summer. After the weekend, we then looked at the impact this had on calls for service, and it was very clear. In the evening and overnight hours, our pending calls for service went way up. An inverse correlation occurred in that when we had less staff, pending calls went up. We had less staff during those times because we had to move all these resources that we would have otherwise been able to respond to those calls for service during the evening and overnight hours to day shift to manage those events so that we could provide that safety product. Another example is during the Freedom Convoy, many senior officers were required to dedicate their time managing resources as we shut down heavy truck and large vehicle access to Queen's Park and Hospital Row, so we could prevent what was occurring in Ottawa at that time. The thing was when we pull resources away from their regular jobs, that work doesn't go away. It simply piles up. At the time, I was the inspector at 55 Division, and I worked about 14 12-hour midnight shifts in a row as the incident commander managing the resources overnight. This meant that at 55 Division, the work that I was responsible for wasn't getting done. And after the convoy ended, it took me weeks to catch up. This slide shows a snapshot of some of the events and protests that we have managed from a public safety perspective, keeping in mind that Pride and other events, although occupy only one line on this slide, it actually represents about 7 or 8 separate events with street festivals and 3 separate parades. The C&E represents 18 days of staffing. Caribbean Carnival represents 3 deployment days and nights of staffing over a long weekend in August, which is also a highly coveted time for our members to take time off with their families. Other major events are also sprinkled about, making for seemingly constant state of planning and resource reallocation. When it comes to assistance to other police services, quite often our Public Order Unit, or POU, is called upon to assist in a public safety capacity because of the resources we bring, including our mounted unit and drone capabilities, our professionalism and efficiency in managing large crowds. Early feedback from a recent audit of our POU by the Solicitor General's Office found that the Toronto Police Public Order met and in most cases exceeded provincial standards in deployment tactics and training. As the SolGen traveled around the province as part of this audit, other police services remarked that TPS were the subject matter experts in the field of public order. The SolGen audit team spoke about the interoperability of other police services, our embedded paramedics and firefighters on our teams for rapid response, and the manner in which our arrests are dealt with in an efficient manner. This report will be finalized and submitted to the Chief and the Board in the next few months. So having said all this, I often say we're busy because it's really our own fault. Why do people come here? Besides having 87 out of the 108 consular offices in Ontario located in our city, which are often desired locations of political protests, we actually do a really good job of public order and safety. People wouldn't come here to protest and demonstrate and attend parades and sporting events and cultural festivals if they didn't feel safe. Let's not forget the fact that Toronto has the only professional basketball team and the only professional baseball team in the country, not to mention a hockey team with a very loyal following. The more people that come to our city, the heavier the draw on police resources. However, we do it right and we do it well. Our success is also the success of the City of Toronto. This slide really illustrates the increased demand on policing resources to manage public safety at large-scale events. The increased need for policing resources depends on several factors. In the case of Pride, parade routes in 2023 were extended, beer gardens were added, and more people attended. These are all positive things, as it shows that people attend because they feel safe. But this comes at a resource cost. Other factors that affect our resource deployment include the current political climate around the world, recent events such as targeted hate-filled mass shootings, many of which occur in the U.S., and recent local trends. For example, the large increase in policing at the Victoria Day fireworks stems from a TikTok trend over the last few years called Adrian's Kickback Party. This involves young people connecting on social media and attending a common outdoor space for the purposes of having a large party. Unfortunately, in Toronto, many people attended Woodbine Beach on the day before and the day of Victoria Day for nefarious reasons. They brought fireworks, including Roman candles, and began essentially having a fireworks war with one another, causing a very serious public safety issue. In one circumstance, some of these young people shot Roman candles directly at a woman pushing her children in a stroller. Other innocent bystanders had Roman candles fired at them, causing injuries. In another case, someone lit a firework and tossed it under the belly of one of our police horses with a mounted officer on its back, while another mounted officer was hit in the head with a Roman candle blast. During one such event, an emergency assist from across the city was put over the police radio as police trying to manage all of this were clearly outnumbered. And these events hit the media very quickly, and most of the time involve local councillors calling on more police resources. So this leads us to dedicate more policing resources to the next event to ensure public safety. One of the duties of a police officer under the Ontario Police Services Act is to preserve the peace. With events back online as we came out of the pandemic, increased crowd sizes and footprints due to increased interest in these events, the use of social media to mobilize thousands of protesters in a matter of 3 hours, as we saw last month with a pro-Palestinian protest at the Israeli consulate, current political climates, and a safe place to do all of these things, we are experiencing an ever-increasing demand on policing resources to provide our quality product of safety. The latest example of a resource draw is Project Resolute. As a result of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East and the fear felt by our communities here at home, we commenced Project Resolute. This involves the daily deployment of our officers dedicated to communities and performing community policing initiatives, or CPIs, which are premise checks on various places of worship. It also involves extensive community engagement and enhanced investigative response to hate crimes. It involves a public order response to manage the mass protests we are seeing several times a week, which draw tens of thousands of people. Project Resolute is managed by a newly formed area command working under the incident command and incident management structure. Resolute involves many police resources from across the city, including traffic services, public safety response team, and the Toronto Police College. As the initial planning and operational lead of Resolute, which was then called Project Vigilance, I received calls from many of my emergency management colleagues from across the GTA and even Calgary and Vancouver, asking what and how we were ensuring public safety during the first few weeks of the conflict. We shared our models. It's clear that the Toronto Police Service is viewed as a leader in this field across the country. However, when we draw on resources from across the city for protracted periods of time, we have to decrease, pause, and in some cases, eliminate certain lines of business. So a goldfish somewhere isn't getting the water that they need to feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector. And while special events are really vital to the city's economy, we really have seen events and protests grow in terms of the cost and in terms of the complexity and the length of time of those events. So it's really important that we work with the city directly to ensure that the events that are approved are at the appropriate footprint and that we can staff them in line with the lean resources that we currently have. And so now moving on to the last service area, to speak on traffic services, we have Superintendent Jacqueline Bose, our service lead.
Good morning, Chair. Our mandate and focus at traffic operation revolves around the Toronto Police Service and the City of Toronto's commitment to Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a multinational traffic safety initiative that has a main goal of achieving zero fatalities or serious injuries on our roads. Toronto Police Service uses education, awareness, and enforcement to increase safety for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists across the city. Year to date, in 2023, we have seen a 36% reduction in fatalities on the roadways of Toronto. We have, however, seen an increase of 14% in collisions, with 49,000 collisions reported as of September 2023. We continue to enhance our opportunities to identify impaired drivers on our roadways this year by investing in 150 new approved screening devices. Frontline officers can use this device to support roadside impaired driving investigations and also for mandatory alcohol screening. Stunt driving continues to be a challenge for Toronto and other jurisdictions in the GTA. Toronto Police Service took the lead on Project Burnout this past year and laid a total of 90 dangerous operation charges and 135 stunt driving charges on the drivers that cause havoc and pose a serious risk to other drivers on our roads. Our Vision Zero enforcement team's mandate is to proactively focus on the big four offenses: speeding, aggressive driving, distracted driving, and impaired driving. This team has been responsible for, on average, each year since its inception in 2020, 20% of all enforcement for the Toronto Police Service. This team received the Ontario Association of Chiefs Police Award for Traffic Safety Excellence in 2023. So some challenges. 2023 has seen ongoing challenges for traffic services to provide dedicated resources for proactive enforcement. One of the biggest challenges this past year has been the enormous strain on traffic resources for all events. As one can imagine, most if not all events have a traffic or road component. The truck convoy plan alone required many traffic points and also required the need to have strategic ramp locations covered on the Don Valley Parkway and Gardner Expressway. Toronto has the unique responsibility of being responsible for two highways that are critical to the infrastructure of our city and therefore integral to maintain open for movement of people and goods. When traffic resources are pulled to support events, business continuity for traffic services becomes tested because of the specialized nature of our officers, being drug recognition officers, breath technicians, and collision reconstructionists. Another challenge that we are navigating is the introduction of multiple mobility devices like e-scooters and e-bikes throughout our city. This has posed its own unique challenges as there are no common rules surrounding their use on city streets. It's also an area where we are regularly called upon to do enforcement, but we do not have the resources to proactively do this. This issue will not be going away as we have seen a huge increase in the use of these devices as a delivery method. In education and awareness, we hope to engage all road users, and we use media and social media presence, and we've been quite successful in the last few years. Some of you may know Sean Shapiro, who's Ask a Traffic Cop. He's maintained 670,000 followers and has had over 2 million impressions in 2023 alone. We also regularly engage radio and TV news channels to spread traffic safety messages. This approach has generally helped us to ensure we're reaching to the younger generation of drivers and road users and also newcomers to our city. We regularly engage with Toronto Transportation, and this is a critical partnership that we value and leverage to ensure we support and are aware of city strategies and programs. A recent partnership that we had with the Canadian Automobile Association, 680 News, and Omni TV has allowed us to create One Decision Can Change Your Life road safety campaign. This message has been translated into 5 languages to broaden our reach to the communities of Toronto. Finally, Traffic Services values educating our young drivers. Our members were recently given the opportunity to participate in a program that saw kids from neighborhoods across Toronto achieve their goal of earning their G1 driver's license. This program ran out of our own police college, and the hope is that it will be expanding in 2024. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Superintendent. And so now we've heard from our service leads on how well we're doing in terms of service delivery, but we also seek to understand the public's expectation in terms of our service delivery. Public engagement is an important part of our budget process so that we can incorporate the voices of our community in how we shape our priorities. And our objectives in public engagement are to ensure that we get some meaningful feedback from the public, that we do this early in the process, and that helps to inform our priorities. We want to make sure that we have a legitimate process, one where the data is statistically significant, and that it properly represents the demographic diversity of our city. We continue to use this process to make sure that we increase awareness regarding our budget, and we help to educate the public on our budget. And finally, this process is really intended to be iterative, and each year we look to make this a better process with each new budget. There are several points of engagement where the public can engage with our budget. And starting with the city engagement process, from November 1st to November 30th, the city has established an online survey, and they also have some in-person consultations where the public can share what they think about the budget and where they think the investments should and shouldn't be made through the 2024 budget. We have also added 3 additional opportunities for engagement with the addition of 3 board budget subcommittee meetings, this being the second of 3 meetings, where the public can learn about the budget and they can also have a voice by making a deputation. We have also conducted a community budget survey, and this was done by Forum Research on our budget priorities, and I'll share the results with you on the following slides. And then we continue to post a wealth of information, including our line-by-line budget, unit by unit, on our website, along with other interesting information on our budget so that you can learn more. And finally, there are opportunities in further meetings with the board, with the city standing committees, and with council to weigh in on the budget. So similar to last year, our survey was conducted by Forum Research. It was a computer-assisted telephone interview that was using random digit dialing, with an option for people to complete the survey online if they desired. And it is representative of our population in Toronto according to 2021 census data. 1,500 people were surveyed, and the survey gives an error rate of plus or minus 2.5%, so it's pretty accurate. And so in that survey, the results showed that 9 out of 10 respondents expressed concern that we have a 22-minute response time. And this was very much in line with last year, with a 3 percentage point increase from last year's result. And this, again, is the most urgent situations like a B&E in progress, where a child might be being apprehended, a shooting, and that's our response time for those high priority calls. 92% of respondents showed some level of concern that we are not answering our 911 calls within the 15-second NINA standard, which is again in line with last year's result. 88% of respondents indicated that it is important to have a neighborhood community officer assigned to their community, and 56% of people said this was very or extremely important to them. 91% of respondents indicated that it's important to them to be able to actually report some lower priority crimes online, and we did ask about some of the lower priority crimes and whether or not they wanted us to continue to respond to those calls, and overwhelmingly they did. They did not want us to remove unwanted guest calls, disputes, and check well-being calls. And so on the whole, respondents indicated that they would like in 3 of our service areas to see an increase in service levels, and then in 3 areas, being the courts, events and protests, and traffic, they did not recommend that an investment be maintained. And so that was our survey result, and this brings us now to the staffing portion of our presentation. You've heard about our services, our challenges, and now we want to address where we need to build capacity. But first, we use this chart on uniform demographics to inform demands for skills, for people, and for our hiring plan. And you can see from this chart, it shows the years of experience of our uniform officers. And on the orange bar, in 2023, 25% of our officer workforce were officers that had less than 5 years of experience. And this is notable because from 2019, there was half of that in terms of less than 5 years experience at 12%. Also on the top end, we are a more top-heavy organization with 1/3 of our officers having more than 20 years experience, which means they are headed soon into those years where they will be eligible for retirement. So this is very much a product of our hiring history. 30 years ago, we did have a hiring freeze, and then the years subsequent to that, we had massive hiring to catch up. And so now those officers are coming due for retirement. And in a few years, in fact, over the following decade, about 300 officers are expected to leave. 3,000 officers, which is quite a significant number. The numbers in the middle are also changing. You can see by the yellow and blue part of the bar, officers between 10 and 20 years of experience. That is shrinking, and that is the sweet spot of experienced officers where they help to mentor the less experienced officers in their on-the-job learning. So all of this shows a few things. It tells us that we need to make an investment in supervision, that's critical because we have very young officers and inexperienced officers doing very unpredictable and really dangerous work. And then also, it really highlights the need to maintain a good pipeline of hiring to prevent the large loss of officers that we anticipate losing over the coming years. And if we don't make those investments, we can get ourselves into a hole that will be very difficult to get out of because of those limited capacities to hire and the spots that we get at the Ontario Police College. Now, we did, I believe, show this in the last budget subcommittee meeting, but this is a good reminder and really ties to earlier in the presentation when we heard about the direct relationship between the growing population and calls for service and increase in demand. And this growth happened at the same time that the number of officers were substantially decreased. And on the left, you can see the population of Toronto. It's really telling there's a very steep curve in population growth here. From 2010 until last year, in fact, we grew by over 460,000 people, which, to bring that into perspective, that is the size of London, Ontario, which has 600 to 700 officers serving that community. We're seeing an even steeper growth curve for 2023 and 2024 at over 200,000 people in growth, and this is the equivalent to what we've seen really in the last 7 years. So it is growing exponentially, the city. On the right-hand side, this relates that growth to our number of officers, and it shows the number of police per 100,000. This is a measure that's used by Stats Canada as a benchmark, and you can see that we've had a steep climb in the ratio of our number of officers serving our community. Back in 2010, we had 208 officers per 100,000, and we're down to 165 in this budget year. And our objective is really, it has been in 2023 and 2024, to at least keep up with that pace of growth. If we can't keep up with that pace of growth with increasing the number of officers, then we are going to see a further degradation of response times, an increase in case backlogs, and a decrease in case closure rates. So in the previous slide, you saw just how we compare to ourselves in terms of per capita, but this shows how we compare to other large urban police services. On the left-hand side, you can see how many people an officer serves in their city, and the biggest workload by far is in Toronto, with over 600 people served per officer. That's 200% more than Chicago, 30% more than Montreal police officers. On the right-hand side, that's the view that I talked about in the previous slide, and this is just shown a different way. Toronto has the lowest number of officers per 100,000, and this is in 2021. We had 169 per 200,000. So the closest to us would actually be Vancouver at 190 officers per 100,000. We're including this slide so that you can see that there is sometimes some comparisons made to surrounding suburban police services, but as you heard earlier, we are unique, being a hub for many of the crimes and also for the events that occur in this country. And so it's important to note that surrounding suburban areas to large cities typically have lower police officers per capita due to diseconomies of scale and the different policing requirements. And if you look at the graph on the slide, Vancouver and Montreal are significantly higher in terms of their ratio of officers than their surrounding suburbs. With Toronto, we actually have a much less gap between us and our surrounding police services, and that's due to years of austerity that significantly shrunk our workforce. Okay. So now we've come to the resource requirements that we are going to be asking for through this budget process. We are further refining these requirements, but on the uniform side, we are looking to prevent further degradation of services and to actually ensure that we can tackle the growth in the calls for service so that we can at least maintain service. We also want to shore up our supervision gaps. while while we continue to have a very inexperienced workforce. And those supervision gaps have happened because of the staffing constraints. So our hiring plan is really based on what positions we have available at the Ontario Police College. They give us an allotment of the number of positions that we can put into their classes, and there's 4 classes, and preliminarily they have indicated that we could have 120 recruits per class. So that will result in a hiring plan that will bring 366 net new officers by the end of 2024, and the intention is to use those officers to address our service level areas, our core service delivery, by allocating officers to our priority response unit and to our investigative backfills and for supervision. And also factored into our estimates are the 160 people that we're estimating will leave in 2024. This would result in a cop-to-pop ratio of 170 in 2024 as opposed to the 165 that we have right now, which is a modest increase in that ratio. On the civilian side of the house, we're looking at filling 80 to 100 functional gaps in civilians, and this is also to address growth and to support the front line. You can see by the chart on the right that 1/2 of our civilians are really frontline staff. They're public-facing roles in a service delivery function that help our front line. We're very different from other organizations in terms of our civilian staff. Also, 40% of our civilian staff are, again, very highly operational. These are our property and evidence management folks, our people that are fixing the cars, etc. And only 11% of our staff is that true corporate footprint that remains consistent at around 11%. So all of these resources tie back to the services that we talked about today, and the addition of the positions, again, are to address growth. There are positions for digital enablement for technology roles. We need, with growth in the numbers of crimes and crime scenes, we need more crime scene technicians. We need more property clerks for the property seized. And we also need to address the digital evidence backlog that we have with redactions in court. And so that sums up all of our staffing requests. And I'll turn it over to the Chief or Savina for any closing remarks. Thank you.
Chair, I'd like, first of all, to thank those who presented. An incredible amount of work went into that. And as you've heard, we're quite lean, and these members did this while running units and providing other services for us. They invested a great time and effort to prepare and present, so I want to say thank you to them and to the whole finance team. And I think there's an overarching theme here, and I think it bears mentioning that, you know, how quickly we get somewhere, how quickly we're able to actually attend to situations which are for the police to attend to, and only for the police to attend to, is very important, and it matters. Time does matter. It matters for those who are experiencing horrible events that require police attention. It matters, time matters when we spend time in our communities, building relationships, trying to foster trust and confidence in our communities, particularly with communities that are sometimes disenfranchised and under-resourced and underserved, where our neighborhood community officers can spend time building relationships and helping people to access services or be referred to services or otherwise feel safe while they try to figure out what services are required. So that is, you know, a consistent issue that our members are dealing with day in and day out during our response to events in the city every day. And I did want to put a final point on supervision. Every time we promote somebody, it ultimately means a police officer is coming out of a police car somewhere. And we are very short in supervision. And given the length of service out on the road, policing in the most dynamic, dangerous, and uncertain environments requires supervision for us to support our members. And it is with all that in mind that this presentation was informed, and we keep moving through our budget process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the amazing and excellent presentation, as well as some of the additional comments that really helped me sort of refine some questions for later, because I will have some questions, but we have a number of folks from the community who have come out to Depute today. So I'm not sure who can stay around or be available later if there are questions. And then maybe we could just take 2 minutes to regroup, and then I will start calling the folks from the community. But thank you. Yes, we're just making sure so our deputants do not have the sun in their eyes, or they're constricted if they're referring to notes or. And I believe the first deputant is Jamie Kersner Roberts from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Good morning. Welcome. Ms. Roberts, can you turn on your mic? It's just the button below.
Is that? I don't see a.
Sorry, as you can well see, I am not the technology person. So.
Is it on? Oh, yeah, it is. I'm Jamie Kersner Roberts, Vice President of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, which is the advocacy arm of UJA Federation, which is the largest group of Jewish organizations in the country. I'm here again today to speak a little bit to the Jewish community's experience over the last 7 weeks since Hamas executed a horrific terrorist attack in the south of Israel. Our community has long been the leading target of hate-motivated crime in this city. That's going as far back as I think, as the statistics, as we've been keeping statistics on that matter. And unfortunately, in the last 7 weeks, we've seen a dramatic increase in these incidents, even from the high normal rate that we have unfortunately have come to be used to. We have seen Jewish businesses, random Jewish businesses being targeted for vandalism, for protests. We've seen Jewish community centers over and over again being targeted by protests, and terrifying children, terrifying elderly people. We have daycares operating under conditions of fear because protesters are outside all of the time, throwing things, screaming at them, calling them parents' names as they come in and to drop off their children. Our community has had to contend with hate rally after hate rally in which protesters are screaming for violence against Jews. It has been a very, very difficult time for the Jewish community here in Toronto. And I think we are so thankful that so far, and hopefully it will not ever happen, but so far we have not seen a serious injury come out of that. And for that, we have only one thing to thank, and that is the world-class police service that we have here in Toronto. We could not be more grateful for the quality of policing that we have experienced, and that starts with Chief Denku, Inspector Rinkoff at Community Safety, Detective Kieran Bisla at Hate Crimes, are just three of the officers that have shown just extraordinary leadership in stepping up from the first moment since the terrorist attack occurred, and we realized that our community was under threat because of calls by Hamas for violence against Jews worldwide. They have stepped up from that first moment and not just been allies, but have been true partners with the Jewish community in ensuring our safety and security in given the ongoing levels of threat. We thank each and every one of our police for every single day for the hard work they do, for putting themselves in harm's way to ensure that our children are safe. We know that the chief did not just create the resources that were necessary in order to meet this threat out of thin air. that the resources needed for all these new community patrols, for all of the new research and investigation at the hate crimes unit, that these resources came from somewhere. They were deployed from other areas of the service, and we know that there is, increasing pressure on those areas that now are facing substantial backfill. We also know that, unfortunately, that once we reach a new level of hate crimes against our community, we haven't seen those levels drop. They seem to just go up and up and up. For the time being, what we're facing is the new normal. Let's hope that down the road we will see those numbers go down, but we don't expect that to happen anytime soon. We need to see a commitment of resources so that that the current level of support is sustainable. We cannot afford to see the violence escalating to what we are seeing in Montreal. Just another firebombing of a community center took place last night. We've seen days of live ammunition being fired at Jewish schools. We can see, just looking eastward, what it could look like if the situation here escalates. We cannot allow that to happen. And I'm asking the decision makers in this room today to make sure that police have the resources they need to keep up the level of protection and partnership that we have seen over the last 7 weeks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And I was going to have a few questions, but you spoke so eloquently and answered some of my concerns by just talking about the community at large and your community and about resources. So I really appreciate not only you came today, and you came last week as well. So, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Roberts? Thank you. The next deputant is Maxine Robert from the United Jewish Appeal Federation of Greater Toronto. Welcome.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having us today. As mentioned, my name is Max Robert. I'm the head of security for United Jewish Appeal Federation of Greater Toronto. My mandate encompasses community security across the GTA. I know we have precious little time, therefore I will get straight to the point. Since the massacre by Hamas on October 7th, the Jewish community here in Toronto has been scared. The community is scared because since October 7th, the community has been the target of hateful protests, acts of vandalism, harassment, and threats of all kinds. They're scared because the war with Hamas isn't happening in a faraway land. They see it right here in Toronto every time they see protesters flying pro-Hamas flags and signs. They're scared because Montreal is only a couple hours drive, and as you all know, Montreal has been a theater of terrible acts against the community. Schools being shot at, incendiary devices, again just last night. People in the community are asking me, and rightfully, they're wondering how long until it happens here. It will not be a surprise to any of you when I say the number and seriousness of the security incidents that are reported to my team have increased significantly. Not a day goes by without folks reaching out to our team to signal some new hateful graffitis, to ask us whether it's safe to send their kids to school, or to tell us they're terrified to go downtown over the weekend because of the constant protests. Jewish shop owners are facing harassment. Schools are looking for guidance to provide reassurance to their parents. Shuls wants to ensure their congregants are safe when holding events. On a personal level, I can tell you that I've lost counts of the number of times I've had to comfort colleagues in tears. And they all have the same question: is it safe? One of the few things that has proven effective at providing reassurance and support has been the Toronto Police Service. I cannot overstate how truly exceptional and collaborative TPS has been since October 7th. In more than 15 years of working and liaising with law enforcement in different capacity, I don't think I've ever seen a level of dedication and cooperation such as this one. They've deployed mobile command centers. They've provided additional patrol presence in neighborhoods. They visited enough schools and schools to ruin the soles of their boots. So mission accomplished. Well, there's a harsh reality. No metropolitan police force can face continuous protests like TPS has going on 7 weeks now without getting exhausted. At some point, I know that Toronto Police Service will have to roll back its additional patrols and presence. As the previous presenters have made clear, this additional presence has been done with trade-offs. I know that every weekend so far, there has been a temptation, which they've resisted, to pull police resources in order to have enough officers to cover the protest downtown, or to allow their officers some well-deserved rotation, some rests. I know that, for example, Christmas is around the corner. These exhausted officers will want to spend some time with their families. We work with the Toronto Police Service every day. We speak to them every day, and we see their exhaustion mounting. So the message I would like to leave you with today: we need these police officers in our community providing reassurance and presence. We know that this additional presence has involved trade-offs in other services. So our call for the City of Toronto is to ensure that there is a fresh injection of additional unrestricted resources into the Toronto Police Service. If there isn't, quite frankly, I am scared of what the police response and presence, not just for the Jewish community, but across the GTA, will be like a few months from now. It's worth remembering for perspective that on any given weekend, when the police suddenly needs to find 1,000 officers for public order duty downtown, that the entirety of 32 divisions payroll is 250 officers for 3 shifts. So on any given weekend, it may involve the presence on a single day of 4 entire police divisions payroll. We realize the strain that has been put on TPS limited resources. We applaud TPS for having risen up to the occasion, and we ask the decision makers to provide them the resources in order so that the TPS can continue doing the good work that they've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robert, and I thank you not only for your comments about your community and how you've appreciated the impact of having the officers and the relationship with your community, but I really appreciate you also commented not only on the resource drain, but as well as the wellness of the officers who are going out in order to deal with this very volatile and stressful situation. So thank you so much for raising that and bringing that to our attention as well. Any other questions for Mr. Rob? Lisa, someone virtual behind you, or you can see Ms. Kostakis. Go ahead, Lisa. It looks like, are you on mute, Lisa?
Thank you. I had to be unmuted or the permission first. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the debutante that without the police supports that they've had in their community, what would your organization be facing right now without that support?
A very different situation. I think that, as I mentioned, the community's fear levels are through the roof right now. I think that, particularly in the first few weeks, daycares, for example, still to this day, daycares in the morning for drop off by parents. They have additional police presence. for a lot of members of the community, particularly the parents, the first thought was, is it safe to leave my children in this daycare, for the entire day? And I think that without that police presence, a few weeks ago, there was a Hamas call for violence day on a Friday, and off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, there was less than a third of the students that showed up for class. So I think that without this additional, and that's with the reassurance of police presence, there were police cruisers, police officers on site. I think that without this additional police presence, I don't think it's an exaggeration that many members of the community would consider, is it still safe to be in Toronto, and would consider moving.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Mr. Robert? Thank you so much for your comments. Really appreciate you coming here today. The third deputant is Miguel Avila.
Good morning. My name is Miguel, and I'm a city builder, activist, and resident of Regent Park. I submitted my deputation in writing, so if I'm not able to speak my 5 minutes of time, please make sure that you read my deputation. Last September, I came and I spoke regarding the paid duty officers watching after construction sites. It was welcomed by Chair Morgan at the time. I believe she said that is a good way to ensure that more civilians are doing the paid duty jobs of police officers. I also mentioned that when a police officer is on duty, according to the collective agreement, they get paid for the time they're doing the construction watching, aside from getting paid from the construction companies. So I don't know how we can save more money to Torontonians, because $1.2 billion is a lot of pressure. I was able to grab this chart from the community consultations with Shelley Carroll and Mayor Olivia Chow in Etobicoke. I went to Four Nation land, and Councillor Holiday, Councillor Crisanti were there. And one of the things that Councillor Crisanti, Councillor Holiday mentioned is that the city receives a lot of grants for childcare over the years. Over time, the province and the federal government gives money to the city. So this charge over here can be changed drastically. So in using the same logic of Councillor Holiday, my question to the board, someone will ask the question to the CFO. Since the year 2018, I believe that the Premier Doug Ford has given a lot of money. He is like the Santa Claus of the Toronto Police, coming and giving money to the police service in the amount of perhaps $300 million so far since 2018. So I want to save myself from making a freedom of information request. Perhaps you guys can give me the number of money that so far the province is giving the service. As you know, every initiative that takes place in this city is absorbed by the high salaries. Councillor Lily Chang, at the last meeting of the City Council, make an important point of creating more opportunities for traffic wardens to do this type of job. Traffic wardens are less cheaper, and they can do the same job. So what happened is that there is a period of time that they had to transfer and train these traffic wardens, which will do the job that currently police officers are doing on the streets. Similarly, my hope is that they will do the same job that they're doing on their days off watching construction sites. Who wants to work on the day off since there's so much work during the week? Don't they have a life? If they want to get more money for watching over construction sites, there is a lot of poor people in Regent Park that needs jobs right now. So that is my advice. If we can move forward with the transition of these jobs over civilians so they can do this fantastic job of watching over construction sites, which they don't represent much to me. When I see a police officer, I don't feel secure, I don't feel safe. I see someone just on their phone playing or talking and chatting with somebody. So this is my request again to this subcommittee of the budget. I have breaking news. Apparently, Olivia Chow has made a dent to ensure that some money relief is coming from the province. I believe Doug Ford has said that they will upload the maintenance of the gardener and the DBP. So much of my deputation that is already submitted is affected by this news because apparently we have found some money for our current deficit, which is $1.5 billion. And that was really affecting this chart because I found out from the City of Toronto CFO that the taxpayers were on the hook for a 38% increase in taxes. So imagine, we're saving money to taxpayers who are overburdened carrying this weight of $1.2 billion, which is the Toronto Police. We can give money to other people of the community to have meaningful jobs and get out of poverty. That is my message to you.
Thank you, Miguel. And I appreciate some of your comments on how there can be savings. You talked about the traffic wardens, hopefully this influx of money from the province, and you made some comments about police officers at construction sites and how we can improve that. But you were here for the whole presentation of the 5 different areas presented of the different service delivery. I was going to ask you, as a person living in Regent Park, in terms of resources, what do you think out of any of those is most important to you, and then what you would like to see Toronto Police maintain?
All right. I'm going to speak now, removing my hat as a member of the Regent Park Neighborhood Association. As a member of the association, we have good communication with the neighborhood community officers, which have ensured that whenever there's a call for someone in mental distress, they know the individual. They know who they're dealing with. You know, hey, it's Miguel. He's going crazy, but you know he's not going to go crazy and do something that is abnormal or violent. He just have a big mouth. So I'm going to point back my activist hat. I think we want to continue the neighborhood community officers program. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, and I really appreciate your comments. Thank you. Any other questions?
You're welcome.
Thank you, Miguel. And the next deputant is Sandra Ziskin. That's what you do. Ask.
Hello. Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, members of the board. Thank you, Chief. First of all, I would like to speak as I'm the managing partner of Diamond & Diamond. It's one of the largest, we are the largest personal injury firm in Canada, and my headquarters is in Toronto. Speaking to even what the previous speaker was saying about creating jobs in the city, I think it's very important. But I'd like to point out something very, very important. Cities that have successful businesses and create jobs feel safe. If they don't feel safe, they move. We've seen this before in Florida, where whole businesses move to Florida, move to Texas. We've seen this in the States. When police officers are not able to do their jobs in their city and protect their citizens, businesses get up and move. We want a thriving city. We want a city to be successful. We need to fund police officers and give them all the tools necessary to make businesses feel safe, or else they will leave. It's as simple as that. And we've seen it time and time again right across in the United States and Canada when they don't feel safe. San Francisco, Chicago, where the carjackings went up in Chicago to the point where I was speaking with people, they were afraid to go fill up gas without having a gun in their car. This cannot happen in Toronto, and we have a duty to protect this great city and make sure it remains great and safe for everyone, not only businesses. I met with parents all across TDSB yesterday, and I've been meeting with parents of students all across. As a Jewish person myself and a person who's been affected by what's going on in the city, people are scared. They want to feel the police. They want to feel the presence. We've been very fortunate thus far with the chief and the response from the police services unit, but things are not going to get better anytime soon. They're going to get worse. I have a child that is a chat. I'm going to try not to get emotional, but I was on the phone talking to a bunch of lawyers about anti-Semitism and combating it through our way, which is the civil aspect, when I got a text message from my child saying there's a live and active shooter in the school. There was no live and active shooter, of course, but at the time, that's what he believed to be true, and all his friends to believe to be true, as they set into motion when needed to be an evacuation of his school. And his school was targeted simply because it is a Jewish school, and he goes there. There is no greater upset or fear as a mother to get a text message like that to come up on, among everything else that I am, I get a text message like that as I'm sitting there in a meeting, scared out of my mind. But the police responded in a way that was incredible, amazing. The chief made sure to attend at the school to make the kids feel better. But this is what we're facing now as a community. People are scared to send their kids to school. I'm scared to send my kids to school. And we cannot have that. If this city is going to thrive, if the city is going to be successful, children should be able to go to school. Children should be able to feel protected. And me as a person who has a business and employs, I would say in Toronto alone, I employ 150 people. They need to feel safe, and the police need the tools, and they need the requisite tools to do what they need to keep it safe. And every successful city should have that. I shouldn't have to sit. Yesterday I sat with about, I want to say 80 parents, teachers, principals in the Toronto District School Board who all expressed to me that they feel unsafe. And it's not because the police are not doing what they can, but there's limited resources to go around, and there's not enough to deal with what's going on and deal with the rise, and nobody could have even foreseen the rise. The fact that this police force hasn't had a meaningful raise in that many years, I saw it in the presentation, is shocking to me as a citizen. It's actually shocking to me. As we're getting an influx of people, an influx in this population, it is sad and shocking to me that we haven't even taken care of our police services and our police force the way we need to as the fourth largest metropolitan city in North America. We need to do our part, or else what we're going to see is a decline in the economy, a decline in businesses, and people are just going to say, listen, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to stay here. It's not safe for me. It's not safe for my kids. I'm going to move to Florida. I'm going to move to Texas. I'm going to do what many other people and businesses have done up until now and just picked up and leave. And we cannot have that. This is a great city. We need to continue to make sure it's great. And the fundamental of that and the core of that is the police. If we are not safe, we cannot live here. It's as simple as that. And we have to trust in this city and that it will be safe. So I'm asking the board to give the police services everything they need to make sure that this city continues to be one of the greatest cities, in my opinion, in the world.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ziskin, especially not just your comments as a member of the Jewish community and a mom, but also as a business owner, and sharing the comments as well. And I think your comments are very well taken. I read in the paper not long ago that a Whole Foods in a fairly affluent area of San Francisco actually had to close because of concern over safety of the employees who work there. So I don't know, Chief, or anyone else has questions of Ms. Ziskin?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming today. The next deputation is from Chris Langenfeld. I believe Mr. Langenfeld is joining us virtually.
Yes, good morning, Chair. I'm actually on the phone and sharing my screen here.
Thank you.
Today thank you. Today we don't have the opportunity to go back and look at the minutes from the last item, so I've got a bunch of notes here, but I don't think I'll have time to actually speak on them. Looking at the presentation today, you notice that 12% of the budget goes towards crime prevention, yet it's only 10% of the staff. So why does it cost 20% more for crime prevention staff versus the rest of the Toronto police officers? I also noticed that only 2% of the budget goes to events and protests, and I'll mention that later. There are some issues here with response times, and what we need to be looking at, of course, is how many times do we have a whole bunch of officers who are on duty but not actively responding to calls, to compare whether it's just a question of, in fact, when the officers are assigned. And if you look at the number of calls, in fact, the total number of calls and the number of calls attended have dramatically reduced, and they've been increasing year over year. And yet, of course, we have the service requesting more staff and more money. For years, the police service has been talking about coming up with optimal shift schedules, and this ties back to whether or not we, in fact, have available units. And again, this is now just a next step that apparently they're still planning on looking at shift schedules that they've been talking about for 15 years now. Looking at the major crime numbers here, of course, if you actually compare 2022 to 2019, you see that with the exception of auto thefts and theft over, the only other number that it didn't go down is assaults, and it actually only went up less than the amount that the population has increased during that same time. And obviously, if you doubled your population, you're going to have more assaults. That 12% of the budget, $139 million worth of policing, goes towards crime prevention. So how exactly are we getting value for money here? And what exactly are we defining as increased resiliency and capacity? Sounds like a word salad to me. Looking at the events and process, again, here we've got all these numbers that have reportedly gone way up over this year over pre-COVID times, and yet again, it's still, according to page 8 of this presentation, only 2% of the budget. So, you can say that that's an issue, but obviously it's not relating to a lot of money here. Looking at these slides, the figures in the chart at the bottom there and that are carried here from the 2023 budget, those numbers match the City of Toronto's numbers, $3.1 million for a projected 2023 population. Yet somehow the service came up with these magical numbers of now it's going to be $3.13 million. Basically 30,000 more than what the city projects. Those numbers don't correspond to anything available anywhere else, so they seem to be just made-up numbers to somehow justify an increase in the number of officers and the financing. Looking at the number of officers here, of course, Toronto likes to compare the number of officers per capita with other cities. But in Toronto, we've spent the last 15 years moving a lot of our officer-related positions over to civilian positions. So when you add in the number of TPS special constables that are part of the police budget, and then on top of that, you have to add all the non-police budget. So we have TTC, TCHC, U of T, and others that are involved in policing that, in fact, aren't even part of the $1.16 billion police budget. Meanwhile, Chicago, that has this huge number of police officers, has a high crime rating, whereas Toronto has moderate to low, and that's based on these statistics here, which is anecdotal information, but I don't know of any other figures, and Toronto doesn't put any out. Similarly, looking at this other chart, they compare Toronto to Vancouver and Montreal. Meanwhile, Vancouver and Montreal's transit officers are officially police, and so they are presumably counted in these numbers, whereas in Toronto, TTC special constables aren't counted as police officers, so they don't count in our ridiculous number. Neither do court services, TTC, TCHC, U of T, traffic, district, and other special constables. So the reality is that Toronto has far more police officers than what the service likes to report we do. They simply aren't police officers. They're civilians that are doing police work. And again, when we look at the total number of calls have gone down. The number of calls attended have gone down 9% in the last 5 years, and yet we've seen the number of police officers dramatically increasing. Going back to here, the recap from the first budget, they talk about the fact that the population has gone up, but the percentage that police budget represents of the total city's budget has decreased. But again, this goes back to in 2010 and before, the Toronto Police Service committed to moving a lot of the positions from officers, from uniformed police officers, over to civilians, special constables, and civilianized roles where a police officer wasn't required. So, in fact, when you compare Toronto's numbers...
Mr. Langenfeld, your time is up. I'd let you go over a little bit, but thank you. And I think Deputy Dollawall has just a couple of comments with respect to some of the queries you raised, and then thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for, I think, what I would consider a very thorough review and a point-by-point sort of commentary on the presentation. Certainly, if we have a copy, great. If we don't, if we could get one, we're happy to sort of take it away, and if there's points that need to be clarified, I'm happy to do so after or even at the next presentation. One of the things just around some of the comparisons of constables and kind of cop to pop and those things, it is important to know that one, it really is just a guide. It is not the only measure we use. But also every jurisdiction is different. So Vancouver, as one that's example, they do have a Vancouver Transit. They also have a West Vancouver Police Department that is completely separate from Vancouver Police Department. So there is, some caution that always needs to be applied to doing an apples to apples, but obviously we try to show the trend more than the actual absolute number. On some of the other points, and your point around calls attended, we have talked about that the calls we do attend are taking longer, whether it's mental health calls or others, between reporting requirements, some of the administration work and the mental health, but certainly we can take another look at maybe providing some of those explanations. So I think for the next meeting, happy to kind of add some of these points into the next presentation, if that would be helpful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langenfeld, for your presentation. Next deputant is Tom Mihalik.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here with you. And as you all know, I have a small retail store in Kensington Market, and the Black Friday sale still continues. No, just for the record. I left the store at a time where we're busy, but this is more important than business. You cannot put money, dollars, and cents on our safety and our security. What really makes a great city, and I always thought what makes a great city in my eye and in my point of view, somebody who worked on the streets. And as you all know, Tom's Place has been there since 1958. I came to Canada in 1968, and most of our business in Kensington Market was done outside. most of the customers that I first met were shopping with us on the street of Kensington Market. We always had clothing outside. And I spent a great part of my day selling outside and inviting customers that were willing to come into our store. But most customers were running. So I sold them a pair of shoes for $2. I sold them a T-shirt for 50 cents. And people from all across the world came to Toronto, and they ended up in Kensington Market. It was a melting pot. I never felt unsafe. I didn't know what it means to be unsafe in my city, the city that I love and I care for. And the customers were happy shopping at the cheese store, at the fruit store. And we were not scared that if we put the merchandise outside, it would be stolen or we would be hurt. I never imagined that. And unfortunately, over the years, the crime has increased tremendously. And small businesses don't have the tools or the money to hire security guards. So it's difficult for them. And there's nothing worse when a business owner like us that works with his sister, I work with my sister and my son and other family members, and I have to be concerned about their security and safety. And when I was growing up, there was always a police officer on the beat that knew all of us, that visited the stores. He knew us by name. Kensington Market was a very special place and still is. We understand that we don't have all the same means. Some people have more money, some people have less money, but everybody's welcome to Kensington Market. When you have mental issues, that's a big problem. Or when you have drug and alcohol issues, it's a big problem. And the people on the street are much more violent now than ever before. You know, I feel really bad for them, and I wish there was something else that could be done. And who gets stuck with all these people is the neighborhood police officers that, in my opinion, are doing a fantastic, fabulous job. And we need more of them. I cannot put a dollar and cents on the safety and security of my staff when they come to work. And as you all know, everybody shops at Tom's Place. Especially, you know, I was going to wear a blue suit, but I didn't want to overdress. So I settled for a gray suit. But my point is that, you know, when I hear all these dollars and billions and zillions, who cares? I was never a bookkeeper. What's most important to me is that everybody that shops in my store, everybody that lives in this city, gets the same attention from the police force. And they're an important part of our lives. And when we have a lot of customers that will come from the States, and they say, what a great city. What a beautiful city you're living in. That makes me feel proud. But I know that underneath, there are a lot of issues and a lot of problems. We have to strengthen the police, not weaken it. I have heard a few people before me, and they spoke so eloquently, and they spoke so well. And I agree with them. Of course, there will be issues. There are always issues. But don't do it on the expense of the public. Once again, we had some major issues in our store, and the neighborhood police officers came to our store, walked us to the parking lot, made us feel safe. And I really appreciate this great opportunity. And I have to go back to the store because we're selling. Black Friday has been pretty good. And it should be for many more years. And I hope I don't have to come here and bore you to death. So let's keep the Toronto police officers strong, healthy, and let's keep this city safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mihalik. I really appreciate your comments. I have brought my husband and shopped at your store, especially in a lot of the early days when, you know, we were looking for a sale. But I appreciate not only your comments just as a business owner and feeling safe, but I really appreciate your comments about talking about equal sort of access to safety by police officers in the community, because some of us, like you said, have more ability to have security or to have, you know, homes or whatever offers protection, but you talked about some of the problems in Kensington Market. So I really appreciate you highlighting that for us, because that is a really good point in terms of that the police don't just serve certain communities, they serve all, and you're speaking for those who cannot speak the disadvantaged. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the store.
Thank you. The next deputant is Sam Goldstein. All right, we can go back if Mr. Goldstein comes back later. Next speaker is Dov Markowicz. I thought he was here. No? All right, we'll hold it down in the event before the end of the meeting, Mr. Markovich. Next is Carly Kalish, of the Executive Director of Victim Services, Toronto. Welcome.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carly Kalish. I'm the Executive Director of Victim Services Toronto, and we help people in the immediate aftermath of crime and sudden tragedy. I'm speaking today to express the critical importance of increased funding to Toronto Police Services. Response times matter. They matter to victims. It can be the difference between life and death. Toronto Police Service is our major referral source to Victim Services Toronto. They are the ones who most frequently refer victims to support services. I'd like to highlight the exemplary collaboration and innovation demonstrated through Victim Services Toronto's Exit Route program in support of Toronto Police Service. I'm calling us VST for sake of time. VST's Exit Route program stands as a testament to TPS's commitment to innovative solutions addressing complex issues. This program, designed to support victims of various crime types, showcases the police force's openness to collaboration by working in tandem within community organizations. The synergy between law enforcement and victim services not only amplifies the impact of their efforts, but also sets a precedent for effective partnerships. Furthermore, the allocation of the police budget to embed social workers within the homicide and missing persons unit is a forward-thinking approach. This integration ensures that comprehensive support is provided to victims and their families during some of the most challenging circumstances. The emotional and psychological assistance offered by these social workers enhances the overall effectiveness of law enforcement in delivering justice and support in collaboration. The collaboration between TPS and partners to conduct human trafficking prevention workshops in schools is another example of the proactive strategy to address a pressing societal concern in collaboration. By engaging directly with the community, the police contribute to prevention efforts, fostering a safer environment for our young people. In essence, funding Toronto Police Service is not merely an investment in law enforcement, but a commitment to community well-being. The collaborative efforts mentioned above exemplify the innovative and holistic approach the police force adopts to ensure the safety and security of all our citizens. I urge you to consider a broader impact of funding Toronto Police Service, recognizing the positive outcomes derived from initiatives like the Exit Route program and the integration of social workers into divisions and units. These efforts not only strengthen the bond of law enforcement and the community, but also contribute significantly to the overall safety and resilience of our community. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and I trust that you will carefully consider the invaluable role that Toronto Police Service in building a safer and more secure community in collaboration with social service agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Catlish, and I want to thank you for all the work that you do, as well as all the other folks in the room who are either community activists or represent different communities where they, give of their time and give back to the community. And Nadine, did you have a question of Ms. Catlish?
Thank you so very much, Carly, for your deputation and your comments, and especially with the work that you've done. I've heard in the previous weeks and seen just the impact that it's had, and I think we definitely need more and more supports in this area as well. But I just wondered if you could share a little bit about the numbers of clients that you've been able to help through the supports that you've had with Toronto Police Services.
Sure. So annually, I can speak to last year, we supported 17,000 clients. So 17,000 victims and survivors of all different kinds of crime types. And I can tell you that our human trafficking statistics are increasing, almost doubling annually in terms of the clients that we're providing supports for. And we are now embedded in a number of 5 divisions within TPS, and also embedded in the human trafficking unit, and working towards being embedded in the ICE unit, so the Internet Child Exploitation Unit, homicide and missing persons in that. And I presented previously to the board in terms of all of the incredible findings of the pilot of us being embedded in terms of decrease in intimate partner violence, repeat clients, and prevention, and increases in community feeling safer and more comfortable reporting to police through victim service intervention, through that warm transfer. And so working together is invaluable in order to continue to keep our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Catlish. The next deputant is Norm Gardner, please. Good morning. Welcome, Mr. Gardner.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for letting me be here today. And I just want to congratulate the staff for this budget presentation. I think it was an enormous presentation showing a lot of transparency that is going on as far as the police department is concerned. And also, it's a kind of a double-edged sword as I look at it, because as you're being transparent, you're showing a lot of the deficiencies that the criminal element can take advantage of. And one of the facts that really was outstanding to me was the response time on primary calls. 22 minutes is just not a satisfactory response time. The Auditor General in your report indicated that 11 minutes to wait for a 911 call was not adequate as well. So there's a lot of things that, from the uniform side, that are deficient at this particular time, and that is because the city has not kept pace with the police budget and compared to other budgets that the city is, responsible for. And certainly something has to be done to do this. In 1992, we're going back a little bit in history here, but we had almost 5,700 sworn officers. And today, we only have a little over 5,100 sworn officers. Now, I know we're taking in, some of the people have mentioned, that we have special constables and we have other resources and civilians in uniform as well, but that is still not adequate in terms of being able to respond to emergency calls and keeping people in this city safe. As well as the primary, response, which is really a prime concern to so many people when you need a policeman instantly, we have problems in the traffic. Traffic is, we had far more traffic officers years ago to respond to incidents regarding special constables who were officers trained in traffic control, et cetera. And, recently, outside my condominium, there was an accident, but it took about 2 hours for somebody from traffic to respond, which shows that some of the other areas are really deficient in personnel as well. Another thing, that even though you have, say, 5,100 officers, sworn officers, there's a lot of officers that are not working because of health reasons, injuries, and other factors that keep them from the job. So you're not really getting all 5,100 officers or all sworn officers on duty at one time or another. You've got to take into consideration training, so they're off for training for certain times. So people who wanted to fund the police or keep the police budget are really harming the citizens of this city. And that really needs to be dealt with. I certainly hope that all city councilors get an opportunity to take a look at the budget as been presented here today. It took about an hour and a half to go through that budget presentation, and there's certainly a lot of things that I learned, and I came prepared to talk about some of the things on it, but I'm rambling about other things as well that were not particularly in the budget. But I have to really congratulate the chief and the staff for all this redeployment that has had to take place in the last 50, 60 days. I mean, this is an enormous accomplishment in keeping a lot of people in the community safe, and being able to take resources from other places just to put them where the immediate resources are required. And so I just feel very, very safe and secure that you're able to do this redeployment as successfully as you have been able to do it. Now, if I take a look at my notes, there's about 1,200 responses, I think, every single day to police calls. You get about 2 million calls a day, but I remember that we were able to respond to more than 1,200 calls a day. So I can see that there's a bit, not only the decline in the officers, but the decline in being able to respond adequately. But I'll just suffice in saying that I appreciate the fact that you are here to comply with the Police Services Act, and that is to have adequate and effective police services. And I feel that the board is really doing a good job in fighting for that adequate service. And thank you very much for letting me be here today, and compliment you on being able to do so much with so little. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner, and I especially appreciate you highlighting, the primary response and those particular stats, and talking a bit about what we hear in the news every day. The traffic issues, which include the fatalities and the injuries that we keep hearing about every single day, and as well some of your other comments about just the sheer ability of the officers to be nimble enough to respond to all these recent events, but of course at a cost to their own wellness. So thank you. I don't know if anybody else has any questions of Mr. Gardner. Thank you, sir.
Should I just add one little thing?
Please.
I think it's very, very important to keep up the strength in the investigative units as well, because when you lack primary resources, sometimes you have to take from your investigative units, and they are doing a great job, and we have to keep them at as full strength as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner, for your comments. The next deputant is Derek Morin.
So there's a guy named Mark Saunders, and he ran for mayor. And when he ran for mayor, he had two messages. One is that if you elect Olivia Chow for mayor, that you're going to have to move to Hamilton because the property taxes will go through the roof. And two, if she's elected mayor, that she's probably going to cut the police budget. So I've never come here and said defund the police. What I have said before is detask the police. And a perfect example of that is during COVID. I guess Chief Nish out in Peel region, they even put it on Twitter that like we're not showing up for calls for service regarding these vaccine certificates. I imagine they found out at some point if you get the supposed COVID vaccine and still get COVID, then it doesn't actually work. So there's no purpose for these vaccine certificates. So that's an example of detasking. Now, I'm kind of bummed out that Councillor Cheng's not here because I'm going to talk about something she brought up at Executive Committee. But recently, there was a guy named Damien Moule at Executive Committee. I have the YouTube link of his presentation in my written, who in a very nice way explained the budgeting fraud that has been going on at the City of Toronto every year since the Mayor Miller years, in which every year they have underspent their capital budget. And every year, they've only spent 2/3 of it, what they've budgeted for. He said the city this year is projected to underspend by $1.6 billion. So one question everyone here should ask themselves, how are we supposedly in a $1.5 billion hole and facing the prospect of an astronomical property tax hike? I mean, I don't have a calculator with me right now, but just, $1.6 billion minus $1.5 billion, what seems to me that we're going to end up with a $100 million surplus. So it sounds like nothing more than what they've been pulling down there all this time is a shell game they're playing at Toronto City Hall. And what's odd about this was that he explained this, like Mayor Chow was sitting right in front of him, and she's still going around with this $1.5 billion deficit claim. I don't know if she just doesn't know any better or if she's misrepresenting the people on purpose. I don't know, and she'd have to answer for that. But, I don't know if you gave Savina the copy of the thing.
I did.
Oh, okay, because she'll understand. Like Damien had a number of headlines here. Yeah, two of the slides are in my written presentation. We project a capital budget underspend, he mentions here, which we do every year. He put out a graph which shows, the approved budget and then what they actually end up spending. And so Graphic Matt Elliott on October 12th tweeted that on an item about the capital budget, Councillor Lily Cheng stood up and asked if it's true of the CFO, Stephen Conforti there at the City of Toronto, if it's true the city is projected to underspend on projects by $1.6 billion at the end of the year. And his answer was simply yes. Now, after hearing Damien speak back at Executive Committee, Deputy Mayor McKelvey asked Stephen Conforti, the CFO, are we over budgeting? Then interim CFO Stephen Conforti starts off with, the way we budget our capital program, then he resets what he started saying and switches it up to, but we wouldn't issue debt until the project actually incurred expenses. So Damien here has a headline which leads to some strangeness. He points out in 2022 that the capital budget underspend was actually $2 billion. The transfer to reserves from operating budget was $1.3 billion. Capital from current, I'm not sure what that means, $340 million. But here's the interesting part. Debt issued, $1.2 billion. Remember, the CFO, Stephen Conforti, told Deputy Mayor McKelvey, but we wouldn't issue debt until the project actually incurred expenses. But they went ahead and issued $1.2 billion in debt anyways. And who do you think's paying for that interest? From the bonds or the debentures or whatever they call that fancy commercial paper? The taxpayer. So it seems to me that there's some form of securities fraud going down there in the least.
Thank you, Derek, and I appreciate your comments where we could save the detasking or civilianizing, as we call it, and thank you also for your comments as they related to some perhaps found money in the city that can assist us with our budget.
But if those lefties try and cut the police budget, remember, it's not $1.5 billion in the hole. They're underspending 1.6. They have a $100 million surplus that they're lying to us about.
All right. I was just going to ask you, as I've asked some of the others, as it related to the presentation, was there any areas that are important to you that you feel especially passionate about in terms of making sure they're adequately resourced?
Well, thank you for asking me that, Chair Morgan. I just want to mention I had a really friendly conversation recently with 42 Division Superintendent Papadowski, is it? And she even mentioned to me, she's like, I've heard you talk at the boards. You must know about Chief Demke's priority for priority 1 responses. I want you all to think about something, because I've been seeing reports of another mystery pneumonia in China. And I remember 4 years ago thinking, oh, that's interesting. I had no idea what it would turn into. But I want the service to think about something. What if that happens again, if it, like COVID Part 2, what we now know about masks, right? I've spoken here lots of time, giving you lots of evidence. They don't work. The stay-at-home orders. Come on, we know now by now that wasn't based on science. Interim Chief Raymer even admitted to me he never even saw any signed orders by Premier Ford. What he did say is, well, I did see the memos. Vaccine certificates. Are you guys going to let yourselves get tied up and push off these priority 1 responses? Because Dr. Davila, in the end, did not provide any evidence that any of that COVID nonsense restrictions were based on science. Hopefully, there's a saying, fool me once, fool me twice. Hopefully, since we've all been around the block with COVID now, you guys have learned something, and you call her to account and make sure that she presents the evidence on this stuff, because if she doesn't, she's claiming that all this stuff is based on science and she doesn't disclose it, it's a breach of trust.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Sorry, Lisa had a question.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask Derek something as well?
Yes.
So Derek, just back to that question, stay focused with me here. So can you speak to a service very similar to, thank you, very similar to what I guess Miguel was asked from the chair on, is there a service or an area within TPS that you hear from the community as well, including yourself, that you believe is very valuable, obviously, like every service is, but something that speaks to you and that could also even be expanded and invested in more?
Yeah, I'm not sure, really. What I'll say to that is that I just want to say, while I'm thinking about it, I want to say thank you to Chief Demke. I appreciated his comments during his monthly update the other day, because not only did he mention everyone has freedom of expression, he took it a step further and explained that freedom of expression also includes things that other people might find offensive, but it's like, oh, boo-hoo, we are a common law jurisdiction, and here, I'll provide you remedy by giving you a tissue for your tears, So I would like to hear in the future, while I'm thinking about it, Chief Demke during his chief monthly updates, not only what rights and freedoms are, but what the limitations are, because there's a lot of crybaby lefties out there that would love to take away our rights and freedoms. So, I don't know, that's it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Derek. The next speaker is Brandon Merrick from Harlow Entertainment.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the privilege of speaking before you today. I'm the managing partner of Harlow Entertainment. We're a private equity firm that operates and invests in hospitality and lifestyle assets excuse me, across Canada and the U.S. We employ over 2,000 people in the city of Toronto, and I've lived in many cities around the world, Montreal, Las Vegas, Miami, and chose to move home and build my family and life here in 2017 because I believe Toronto is the best city in the world. Unfortunately, I don't feel as safe as I used to in the city, and it's affecting our business. Crime used to be something that I think we used to dread and read about, but unfortunately has become far too common amongst my network, my businesses, my friends. The violence in the entertainment district is quite troubling and concerning and deeply affects our business. I've been in the nightlife and hospitality business for 20 years, and it's the worst it's ever been, and it affects our livelihood, the ability to create jobs, and how safe we feel walking down the street. Just in the last 2 weeks, my best friend's house was nearly broken into. There was an attempted robbery of my vehicle. 2 masked people followed me into my garage and tried to steal my car. I called 911 and waited on hold for quite a few minutes. The response time was obviously took a lot longer than we'd all wished for it to. So I'm here today to hopefully ensure that the police have the adequate funding to restore Toronto to its potential to be the best city in the world. And as a member of the Jewish community, I'm extremely grateful for the support that our community has received. But I also recognize that resources are finite and zero-sum, and when the support is being provided to the Jewish community, there's other communities that are not being supported at that same time, and the path through that is funding and to provide more funding to resources at all levels of the city. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Merrick. Especially appreciate your comments, given that what you work in the entertainment industry and the safety issues that surround the entertainment district in Toronto. And also, I'm sorry for your own experience of 911, and I thank you for your comments in terms of, really the pressing need for the resources that we need to be able to serve everyone in the community. Did anyone have any questions of Mr. Merrick? Thank you so much for coming, sir. The next person is Dan Panaton. He's from the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. Welcome, Mr. Panaton.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. October 7th was a turning point for the Jewish community in many ways, but it was one that did not happen in isolation. As many people in the room know, for the last several years, hate crimes against several communities, including the Jewish communities, have been rising. And then since the Hamas's attack on October 7th, we've seen 78 hate crimes in Toronto, about half of which affected the Jewish community. This is a community that's only 4% of the city, yet about half of the hate crimes in the last several weeks have targeted this community. Anxieties are very high, to say it simply. I'm hearing daily at work from individuals who are hiding symbols of Jewishness, who are reluctant to send their children to Jewish schools, who are worried about wearing a symbol of Jewishness to a public event. So because of this, the community very much appreciates the resources that the Toronto Police Service has devoted towards policing anti-Semitism. We welcome that the hate crime unit has been advanced into a task force with researchers, and we hope that these researchers can work in collaboration with the many community organizations who have on-the-ground knowledge about the nature of hate. One issue that we did want to highlight, though, is underreporting. A huge amount of the Jewish community recognizes what hate is, and they know that the police are there for them, and they know what avenues they can go through to get help. However, a huge number don't. We have people contacting us who are having religious items vandalized, stolen from their private properties, who then didn't actually know that this was a crime, that they can actually get police help. So what this is telling us is that there really needs to be more education on the nature of hate crime laws in Canada and how people can get help. We recognize that in recent weeks, the protection that's been provided to the Jewish community has not been cheap, and it's been greatly appreciated by the community. Individuals who have been reluctant to send their children to preschools, to middle schools, have told me that they really appreciate the police presence that are often there. So we definitely wanted to send a message of appreciation about that. However, recognizing that it has not been cheap, we also need to recognize, though, that this conflict is not going away for the foreseeable future. And when I said that this was a turning point, we need to recognize that even when the conflict ends, the hatred that left the bottle is not going back in. And so for the foreseeable future, we need additional resources towards education, hate crime, and the monitoring of Jewish properties. Thank you to the board for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Pennaton, especially for not only your sincere word of thanks, but thank you for raising, your comments about the underreporting of hate crime and the fact that perhaps communities are not aware that even if it is a crime, or how to go about even reporting. And I appreciate you talking about the education piece through perhaps not only some of your organizations that you would support, but maybe through our officers as well, who are the experts in this area. So thank you. I really appreciate your comments. Any questions of Mr. Pennaton? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next deputant is Anna Willets. She also made a written deputation, but I believe we have Ms. Willets here virtually. She's from the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. I'm trying to get my picture up there on your screen, but for whatever, there I am. Hi.
Thank you, Ms. Willets.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I won't read our written deputation because it will take more than 5 minutes, but I just want to, and I'd be happy afterwards to tell people more about TPAC, the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition. We've been around for about 25 years. While we definitely agree with all of the speakers today and the police service itself that people deserve and need to feel and be safe in our city, I guess we would take a very, very different approach to that. We believe that the Toronto Police Service, certainly for the last 2 decades, if not longer, from Mr. Gardner's time, I remember making deputations when he was the chair of the board. The police service has expanded and expanded its duties, the kinds of things that police officers are doing. They're reflected in the 4 or 5 different services that were presented today. And we believe that this stretching and reaching and expanding is what has led us to the problems that were presented today in the slideshow. The fact that many things are under-resourced and that there are many problems that can't be responded to. The general direction of TPAC proposals over the last 15 years is to get police out of trying to do everything related to how society and communities function, and instead to focus on addressing violent threats and crimes, the core principles and the core pieces that are outlined in the Police Act and other legislation governing policing. We believe that while community safety is all of our goal, that spending more and more money and resources on police officers is not the way to achieve that. And that in fact studies and reports of all kinds over the years by many, many experts in many fields show that the way to reduce crime, the way to help people feel and be safer, in fact lies in addressing the root causes of crime. And policing is not the root cause of crime. So in our deputation, we also refer to the Violent Crime Severity Index and the fact that it is not as high as many other places in Canada for Toronto, certainly a little bit of an increase in 21 to 22, but that if we look at the data and the facts, in fact, Toronto is a very, very safe place. Again, there's been much research into whether more police or less police or fewer police, lead to more or less crime, and there has actually not been any real correlations drawn between that. So the notion that more police means less crime or that more police means more safety, it has not been borne out. We make suggestions about detasking, as others have talked about, and reducing many, many different areas of the police, and we believe that this is what is needed to get this budget under control. and to help officers feel less stressed and less burned out and less stretched. We need to ask them to do less. We need to take the money that we can save by having officers and policing do less and reallocate and reinvest that money in the community services that can do more, because that is, well, we're going to get where we need to go. We need to examine, we need to look at what officers actually do. How do they actually spend their time? Where can we see civilians perhaps contributing in the area of public events, parades, and demonstrations? For example, we're not saying no officers, we're saying fewer. We can look at the suspensions without pay and how those tend to drag out the kinds of things that officers are being suspended for. That has been done in Alberta. The Association of Chiefs of Police in Ontario has made the demand for several years. Let's make that happen, and that will lead to savings. 2 officers in a car after dark. An agreement was reached in 2019 about loosening that, but that has not been put in place. Some 97% of calls for police service do not involve violence, and of those calls that it is not necessary to always have 2 officers in a car after dark. Disband the mounted unit. It's a nice to have, it's not a need to have or a must have. Look at premium pay. Since you've expanded by 200 officers recently, in 2023, the amount budgeted for premium pay, close to 60 million in 2023, should be reduced by 20 million, by at least 20 million. We need to know what the storage and recording and the archiving of body cam footage is costing. Is that a good expenditure? What is the actual benefit of body cameras? Again, we may come down on the side that they need to be used, but we need to know how much those cost. You talked about that as a pressure. Do we really need armed officers in every situation? We recommend looking at disarming many police officers. And we look at what are police officers doing on police patrol. I'm rushing because I have no time left. I would be happy to do, and TPAC would be happy to discuss these proposals with you in more depth. We hope that you will consider them. We hope that you will trust that the goal is the same, but that our tendency as a society to think that police are the solution to all of our problems, it just becomes an ever expanding bucket that needs to be filled and filled and filled. And we've been doing that for years, and yet we continue to have many of the problems that people are so concerned about. So, and we believe that it's a very expensive way to do community and social work. We believe that I have taught in a college for a long time, people who are going into social and community work. We have skilled people that know how to deal with mental health crises, with people dealing with homelessness, and that sort of thing. And we can do that work in a good way without involving police, unless there are instances where they are truly required.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off, Ms. Willett. I've given you 7 minutes or 8 minutes.
Sorry, I missed weight.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but I do appreciate your comments, especially as they relate to community safety and proactive measures so that the police don't have to get involved in the first place. So thank you. And is there any questions of Ms. Willett? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming on today. Appreciate your input.
Happy to meet with folks outside of this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next deputant is Rabbi Samuel Kay from Holy Blossom Synagogue.
You know, the Madam Chair and the doctor call at the exact same time. That's how it always works out. I apologize for not being in the room. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you all. As you heard, my name is Samuel Kay. I am one of the rabbis of Holy Blossom Temple, Toronto's first synagogue. I want to thank you all and express my and my family's and my community's appreciation to the Toronto Police Service. You have gone above and beyond to be human with me and with my community in a deeply inhuman time. In the days and hours after the monstrous terrorist attacks on October 7th, a terrible dread settled into my community. People were scared, and they were skittish, and they would hold their breaths at the slightest noise from outdoors. The front doors of my synagogue have biblical words of welcome emblazoned on them, and because of the events on October 7th, we have locked them, and we will not unlock them anytime soon. On the Friday after the attack, when Hamas declared their day of rage and they said their goal was to globalize the Intifada and target Jews across the world, my daughter was one of 6 children who showed up to our school, of the nearly 45 who normally attended daily. And through our fear, you have been there. You have been present, and you have been communicative, and you have been reassuring. You have visited us before our worship and introduced yourselves, and you have been there when our children are coming and going. There has always been at least one officer present to reassure and greet the parents of my synagogue. And I hope that more than one of you has also been treated to numerous baked goods from various grateful boobies on their way out. And I will share that personally, when the evening prayer ends and we begin to close our building up for the day, I have been personally reassured to see the police cruisers in our parking lot. I'll share just briefly off script for a moment. My father is a police chaplain going on 26 years in my native Denver, Colorado. And for context and reference, I will be 39 this coming year. And in my entire life, there has never not been an armed security guard or a security professional in my house of worship. Not a single day has gone by without someone filling that role. Weeks ago, when we were preparing for a large event at our synagogue, a white van pulled up unmarked into one of our parking spaces. And while my rational brain understood that that was almost certainly a caterer or a decorator, my heart feared it could be anything else. I don't know the response time, but I do know that within minutes an unmarked black van pulled up, and out of it came at least 4 of the Toronto Police Department officers. We had not called you, but you had been watching, and we are grateful. I don't need to tell you that we are afraid for good reason. My community has seen a drastic uptick in hate-motivated crime since October 7th. Jewish homes and schools and community centers and businesses have all experienced levels of threat. From the explicit bomb threats at Chat several weeks ago, intimidation and hate speech at Jewish-owned restaurants, and the vandalism of Jewish-owned businesses. We are grateful to the Toronto Police Department for your even-handed response, for your strengthened and regular patrols, and for the mobile command centers that are highly visible inside our community up and down the Bathurst corridor. We recognize that protecting our greater community requires your resources, and we are grateful for that as well. And I join with others this morning to respectfully request that the increased resources that you have allocated to keep my community safe from hate be continuously sustained as long as necessary. I am a man of faith and hope, and my people have very long memories. We know that once anti-Semitism becomes normalized and spikes, it does not recede. And even should it recede, it does not do so in the course of days or months, but over years and decades. And so it is my hope and my faith that the world I see outside my window today is not my new normal. But I fear that it is, and I am grateful. I offer up a prayer of gratitude to you and for you for standing with my community at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Kay, and I just want to say how sorry I am that it's a reflection of our society that in your place of worship, that for all those years you have to have an armed security guard. It's tragic. But I thank you for all your kind words, and especially talking in sort of real heartfelt terms, especially about how different folks are feeling when even a van goes by, or how your children are terrified even to go to school. So thank you so much for at least continue to edify us about what's taking place in the community. But I also thank you heartfeltedly for your comments about the response from Toronto Police.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The Chief Demke has
If there's no questions, I did want to just acknowledge a comment you made there, Rabbi. And we are here talking about budget. That's the purpose of this meeting. We know that we police by identifying priorities, and sometimes there are trade-offs. But I've said it before, and I want to say it to you explicitly, we will be there with our communities as long as it takes to return a sense of safety and security. Notwithstanding these budget discussions, we're committed to seeing this through.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming today. The next deputant is Howard Morton. Okay. Oh, there's Mr. Morton. He's virtual. Good morning, Mr. Morton.
Good day, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm here on behalf of the Law Union of Ontario, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. We filed a written deputation, but didn't get it until this morning, and I apologize for getting in late, and I hope that members will read it. Our submission is this: the board does not have the required information to proceed any further with the TPS budget proposal. I'm referring, of course, to the August 18, 2020 board direction to the chief and to the board's budget transparency policy. In summary, both of them require the chief to provide a line by line with respect to area, function, and service provided by TPS. Now, line by line is a term of art in the accounting community, and I would urge you to get some advice with respect to what that actually means in terms of accounting. The Toronto Police Service presentation follows neither the 2020 direction nor the policy. Why do I know this? I can tell you that we filed an FOI application with respect to the 19 and 20 budgets, and the response, we filed it with the board. The response we got back was that the board had no documents with respect to those budgets, and delegated it to the Toronto Police Service to respond. The second point I'd like to make is that there are no savings set out in the TPS proposal. The social services in this city, which are desperately needed by communities, are at serious risk of cuts. All municipal departments and agencies have been asked to identify savings. Yet TPS does none of that, but asks for more. You could respond to me by saying, well, make your representations to City Council. We likely will do that, but our position is that City Council looks to you as the experts in policing to provide sound advice which benefits all of the city in terms of what gets cut and what doesn't get cut. The studies with respect to more police equals less crime, as you know, they go both ways, and I'm sure you've read many of them. They only measure reported cases or police responses. They're not an accurate representation of the true number of crimes permitted in any given geographical area, nor do they address the socioeconomic causes of crime, including poverty, I'm sure as you've heard this before from me, lack of opportunity, etc. I can tell you this: no matter what you do, no matter how much more you give the police, you're not going to guarantee safety in this city. But I feel I can honestly guarantee to you that if there are cuts to social services in this city, crime will drastically go up. The TPS presentation, and I compliment them on it, it's very professional, well put together, but we plead with you not to be, I don't want to use the word fooled, but not to be misled. Because in essence, it's what, and I'm revealing my age here, it's in essence what we used to call a dog and pony show. It has very much attractiveness when you watch it or read it, and yet when you ask the key questions that we say the board should be asking, line by line accounting, savings with respect to some areas of policing, it doesn't address that at all. And for good reason. Of course the police want a bigger budget. Historically, they have always wanted a bigger budget. But don't be fooled by it, because I urge you to go deeper and beyond the TPS presentation. Thank you very much for letting us have our say. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Morton, for your comments. And Deputy Dallowell, as a result of some of the issues that you raised, is going to speak to some of the issues. Thank you.
So thank you for the feedback. I think it's important to understand this is not our formal submission. This is 2 of 3 budget subcommittees. We will, when we come forward with our finalized submission, we will publish, and we have been publishing line by lines on our website. We have one of the most transparent budgets, not just in this city, but in the sector across the country. And so we do provide a wealth of information, and will do so when our number is finalized and when we're ready to actually formally submit. Really, the purpose of the subcommittees, number one, and this one, in a way, is some stage setting and a bit of a form of sort of education and awareness on the services, because as you can imagine, it's hard to put all of this content into just one day. It ends up being quite lengthy. In terms of savings, we last year dedicated a whole section around our cost containment effort. So as I mentioned earlier in our opening remarks, cost containment, if you look at just inflation alone, we think there's at least $260 million of cost avoidance going back to 2010 to now. But specifically around savings and cost containment, there was a hiring moratorium that at one point would have been 70, 80 million a year. And we see that that is part of some of the degradation of service that has since happened. And then there's smaller sort of tactical pieces. So there's internal redeployment that happened last year as an example, and the year before. And when you are redeploying and not hiring in addition, those are then officers you in fact avoided to hire. That over the last number of years of just internally redeploying, internally kind of focusing on our priorities. Last year alone would have been almost 20 million, and the year before that, I recall the number was 30 million when we redeployed the crew and priority response group into other areas. We also, from a non-salary standpoint, are always looking at our contracts. We recently restructured our body-worn camera contract over a 10-year period that will save 70 million over the total contract term. We have civilianized, and the value, the salary differential of some of the civilianization we've done is around 7 to 10 million at least, and that's kind of from just the last few years, not necessarily anything we did this year. So certainly in our formal presentation, we will again dedicate a section around savings and cost containment efforts and post line by lines in an effort to be the most transparent service in the sector.
Thank you, Deputy Dallowell, and thank you, Mr. Morton, for raising those issues to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And the next speaker is Sean Meager from the Change Lab, and he's online virtually.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. My name is Sean Maher. I'm a researcher and a community worker, and for context, in my other work, I also serve as the chair of the board for the Reach Out Response Network and a researcher on policing issues in Toronto and Ottawa. And I want to be clear, I fully appreciate that the work that the police service is doing is complex and challenging. It's a difficult and demanding job, and ensuring safety is a critical priority in this city. That's all the more reason why planning and resourcing the service should be carefully considered. In that spirit, I'm here to encourage the board to face an important fact. that money will not solve all our problems. In fact, focusing on throwing money at our problems is one of the reasons why response times are longer than they should be. I know that the research from the previous TPAC deputant cited is an important item to review in that context. I know there is perennially a logic brought forward in budgets to justify more spending. Some years we hear that crime is up, so budgets need to rise. Some years we hear that we have fewer officers per population than other places. Some years we hear policing has shrunk as a share of the overall budget, and all of those metrics seems to justify more spending. But they all have the same flaw. They are all contextual, anecdotal arguments which lack a consistent and overarching approach to measuring what is an appropriate budget and what an appropriate growth rate would be. For example, in the budget documents that you have today, there are cost comparisons, but they compare costs in a variety of years. Those comparisons vary widely, benchmarking sometimes 2010, sometimes 2011, sometimes 2012. Sometimes they're measured against population, sometimes inflation, sometimes call volume, sometimes rates of specific offenses, but not other offenses. These call for revenues that are set against concerns about current performance metrics like call times and crime rates, but there's no analysis of what the new investment would yield. How much shorter would call times be if we invested 10 million or 20 million? We know last year we invested 45 million, and according to today's presentations, call times nonetheless rose. This anecdotal budgeting model can't really give us a clear picture of what the best budgeting plan is. And for a coherent effort, we need to determine budgets in a way that sets clear benchmarks and clear goals. Let's start with the benchmark. We can't just pick and choose dates to measure from, especially given the dramatic fluctuations in spending that make the selection of the date very consequential in terms of the outcome. We need a logical benchmark. For the TPS, the logical baseline is its founding year, 1998, the year of amalgamation. Measuring against that year, the growth in the service is quite significant. The gross budget of the TPS in 1998 was $520 million. Last year, the gross budget was $1.3 billion, about 2.5 times what it was at amalgamation. Your current analysis rightly points out that inflation eats into that growth, and Toronto is also a lot bigger right now. StatsCan tells us that the city is about 20% bigger than it was, and the Bank of Canada tells us that inflation has eaten about 73 cents on every dollar. But even taking all that into account, the TPS budget is now about $242 million larger than it would be if we fully accounted for inflation and the growth since the service was established in 1998. You could argue from the point of view of goals and need as well, but there is not a great evidence for growing need. Toronto is actually safer than it was when the TPS started in 1998. There were 3 more homicides in Toronto last year than there were in 1998, despite there being 500,000 more people, which accounts for a drop of about 13% in per capita homicide. Indeed, all across Canada, though things vary year to year, and there are ups and downs, and so if you just measure one year to the next, we see lots of fluctuations. Overall, crime severity and crime statistics are down compared to 1998. It makes sense to ask then, why is if funding is up, are response times so poor? And the answer is simple, and the evidence is pretty clear. The problem is not money. The problem is scope creep. Police spend an enormous amount of time doing things that are not police work, and it gets in the way of their efforts to respond to issues of crime and safety. Repeated studies, including the Auditor General's, make that abundantly clear. Studies from 2020 show we spend about $150 million of police time on mental health calls, and that those numbers have only grown since then. The same is true for homelessness. Research from the CCLA shows that the TPS spent about $100 million annually policing homeless people, though the police don't have the tools to house or address their challenges. The consequence of all that is in response times. Every officer spending 8 hours in emerge waiting to admit a mental health patient is an officer not available to attend a break-in. Every police officer sent to Trinity Bellwoods to clear an encampment is one fewer responding to an assault. And there are housing staff, like those who successfully rehoused the people in St. Stephen's last week, that can do that better, more safely, and for far, far less. Asking for a budget increase of 30 or 40 million when there is some $242 million worth of police time spent on non-police work is not the short road to better response times. And as the presentations noted today, getting to the number of officers needed To get response times down without addressing scope creep would be 1,500 new officers, roughly $300 million in new costs. That is not the most practical approach. We have the TCCS that can take thousands of mental health calls off police hands. Yes, that's 1% today, but in Portland, it's 4%. In Eugene, it's 20%. Those models can have a significant impact on the amount of police work required. We have housing workers that can deal with homelessness, and though those aren't always 24/7, we can grow the ranks of those services for about half the cost of sending police to do those calls, freeing up, importantly, twice as many officers per dollar to handle crime and safety issues.
Mr.
We need to
Mahar,
reduce call times,
your time is
but
up.
not more investment is the answer. What the answer is better planning. We need to look at what police are doing and stop sending police to tasks that they are not the best trained and qualified for, and start sending them to the calls that they need to be responding to more quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll just finalize, because thank you for your comments, and especially how you talk a little bit about, shifting and allowing, I guess, other agencies to respond to these problems. But you did touch briefly on some of the diversion programs, such as Gerstein and TCCS. Is there anything else that you saw in the presentation today where you feel, as a member of the public, that resources are important and there is being important work, because you've touched on too? Is there anything else that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned the Gerstein program and the TCCS program, and those are both very strongly focused on mental health. I mean, that is a great example. At this point, we have a fairly limited diversion rate, but its capacity to grow is considerable. Research in Toronto shows that. Research in other cities show that. We're also spending a lot of time policing homeless people, and last weekend's effort to address the encampments at St. Stephen's shows that there are ways to do that are non-police models, that are cheaper and more successful, and result in far less conflict. I think one of the things that we can certainly be doing is expanding the work of some of those focus tables. You also mentioned those as a really important element of what the Toronto Police Service is doing. But often, I know that from working closely with some of the organizations at those tables, often the impediment to using the focus tables to move the most appropriate person into the intervention, so that it doesn't need to be a police intervention, the challenge for that is resources. Community workers, mental health workers, workers from the agencies that sit at the focus tables cost far, far less to send in, and are far better trained to divert people to the kinds of supports that they need, so that they don't have those challenges reoccurring. So we should be focusing our investment on those kinds of care services, and that will be the fastest and easiest way to free police up to respond to criminal calls.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any questions of Mr. Maher? Thank you, sir, for coming and participating today. Now, I believe we've heard all of our deputants today. Were there any questions from the board as it related to the chief or the command team, or anything to do with the presentation? Vice Chair Kostakis has a question.
Good afternoon. I have a couple, actually. I just want to know if anyone can speak to, whether it's the chief or Savina or anyone, as to comments that came from the deputants as well, obviously, in discussing about expansion to the service too. Can you sort of speak to a little bit more and expand on maybe not the difference or the correlation to replacement of and filling positions, like vacant positions, and also, or as opposed to, or including to additional positions that are required for us to not just sustain existing services, but also improve? And maybe speak to some of those numbers. I don't know if you could speak to the costs of them necessarily at this stage, but if you can sort of expand on that and how that speaks to the budget asks and how those impacts will increase and better our services. And maybe secondly, after that, so I don't have to ask again, is really some of the main impacts that will hinder our service delivery if the budget is not approved, I guess, or expected at the level that we require in moving forward.
Thank you for the question. So I'll try to answer the first part, if I understood it correctly. So we, in the 2023 submission last year, we said that we would be at plus 200 this year, and that we would have a hiring plan to support another 200 into 2024. And we are on track for 2023, and this is on the sworn side. For 2024, though, you would our presentation now says, up to plus 368. That is net of separations. And what that assumes is a hiring plan that still needs to be, let's say, confirmed with the province around classes of 120 per class. They've moved to a 4-class model. So it's 120 times 4 classes less any separations that would happen. So it would be backfilling separations. But in addition to that, the increase would go as much as we can to the front line. And in fact, what hinders that we in many ways could potentially would have asked for more if the pipeline at the province would support it. So we are using what we can to maximize the college's capacity as well as the province's capacity. And our plan is to put as much as we can back to the front line to tackle a response rate that far exceeds what our assumptions were last year in terms of where they would be. It would address supervision, which is a theme we did not highlight in a big way last year. We didn't really factor for those vacancies. We have 40 soft sergeant vacancies. We have 150 sergeant vacancies. That's just for this year. That does not account for any other vacancies we will grow into next year or the cascading impacts of those promotions ultimately. Supervision, you will hear, is a big theme. It's around, we have a very young group doing the most unpredictable and unplanned work. There's a lot of operational risk, and there's, frankly, a lot of responsibility placed on sergeants and staff sergeants. So there's a whole theme around resourcing for that. Then some of the redeployment we did. So we're seeing great gains, for example, on our carjacking team. However, those resources came from investigative areas and other areas that we depleted. So there's a group of officers, a part of the Plus 360, that actually has to go back to backfilling some of the redeployments we did this year with the carjacking team, potentially with even our central fraud intake. And then you heard a lot around our investigative capacity and how that's depleted. There are a lot of vacancies in our special ops area in key areas of investigation that do need to be backfilled if we actually want to maintain or increase our case closure rate. I think the key thing to know on the sworn side for all the hiring we plan to do is it is effectively maintenance. It's maintenance with supervision. It is trying to stay ahead and not further degrade the 22-minute response time for priority 1. It also needs to be said for priority 2, it's at least 1 hour. And so these are still very, very important calls. On the civilian side, you heard a lot around the backlog of our of cases, the body-worn camera, all the digital evidence. So there's a considerable number of resources that we do need to think about from a investigations and evidence management standpoint. That would be civilians. So whether it's crime analysts, whether it's disclosure clerks, that's where some of the civilian staff would go. There is a need around building some capacity. If we think of our records management system, NG911, body-worn camera, our ALPR, there's a lot of technology we're introducing. We actually have not brought in all of the technical resources to build and to grow those programs. So there's a good number of civilian positions that would end up going towards that. Does that sort of summarize, I guess, the general pockets, I would say, of where
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it does.
Going?
Thank you.
And then the second part of the question, I guess, was what if we don't get the resources?
Yeah, I appreciate that, the opportunity to discuss that. Listen, we know we're focused on core service delivery. We're focused on the ability to get our police officers when people need them the most, to be there as quickly as possible, because we know that every second counts. We heard that today from our friends from Victim Services, who made it very clear from a victim perspective. Time does matter. It matters immensely. When we think about how we build relationships in our communities, the time our neighborhood officers spend in those communities matter. So we are very much focused on core service delivery, trying to make sure that we're available to when people need us. And we've certainly invested and are fully committed to alternative service delivery models. What we're discussing in Priority 1 and Priority 2 calls are calls where the police are required. This is not somebody else's call. It's our call. And these are victims who need us, the police, to make things safe, to cause an investigation to happen, to gather evidence, and ultimately to hold those who are victimizing our communities accountable. So we are very focused on that. We do have the prioritization of our supervision, given the younger and younger nature of our frontline service delivery. Supervision is absolutely critical. And what we need to focus on is getting our officers the type of support they need, the leadership they need out on the road in our communities, so they can be the most effective they can be when they service our community. So now when I look across the spectrum of resources available to me as the chief to move around, there's not many options that are available. So we take a look at priority response or core service delivery. Tends to be a reactive thing. The public's called, they need our help. There's been a collision, it needs investigating. There's been a fatality or a murder or a shooting, we must attend. Now, when I take a look at what is available to move around, it tends to be the proactive activities. And that's things like neighborhood officers, like elements of traffic services. And we've seen previous efforts to meet our budget constraints and core service delivery, where a number of years ago, we had to close down 13 out of 16 community response units. That's what was required in order to get the critical mass of police officers into our police cars to respond to when the public needs them the most. So what is the impact? We'll take a look at where we end up with finally, but the preservation of our ability to hire so that we can make sure that we're doing everything we can to be as timely as possible in our core service response is our focus. Getting supervision in place where it needs to be and stem the flow of further service degradation. Where they will come from, if we aren't resourced appropriately, it will be, for the most part, from our proactive activity, so that we can service where the public's calling us in an emergent nature most effectively.
Thank you.
I just had one last question, Chief, and I know there's not easy answers, but you talked a little bit about what impacts if these recommendations in the 5 pillars we were talking about this morning are not met and not implemented. But one of the areas was talked about a little bit was already, the leanness and what is happening by virtue of community response to things that right now are what the community is demanding. So, for example, Project Resolute or carjackings. So, given we're already existing, have existing redeployment in order to focus on those areas and to staff them with officers, forgetting about even what a budget cut would mean, what's suffering right now, and it becomes even a further problem down the line.
So we have a number of specialized functions that are not being, we're not doing. So our drug squad resources have been moved around. The impact of that kind of thing, we see some immediate activities, of course, where there's, more complaints or more issues around drug dealing in the city. But over the longer term, these things play out in the entrenchment of organized crime in our city in ways that are very difficult to combat. I will tell you, when we look at our shooting stats for this year, we did have very intentional conversations as a command team. If we look at our numbers, as of November 27th, we are down 15%. But you will recall I sat in this boardroom reporting numbers where we were down well over 20%. So what we can say is shootings are ticking up. Shootings are moving upwards. So when we looked at our redeployment of people, whether for Resolute or carjackings or other activities, we took a look at it at the local community level and the impacts shootings are having, because we can see the impact that the shootings are creeping up. And when you move resources around where our members are not able to be in the communities to provide that sense of safety and security, they reveal themselves in a number of different ways. This is one particular way. We are moving resources out of traffic services. We will see a reduction in the number of tickets written. We have moved resources out of the Toronto Police College. Some discretionary training inevitably won't be happening. So those are the short-term impacts. Once we see what the final process here is, it'll be my responsibility to examine the ability to deliver adequate and effective policing as per the statute, and then take a look at what other resources can be moved around. But I think what's important is to recognize the flexibility for me as the chief operationally is actually quite limited. And the impact will be on our proactive activities for the most part, because we already, our service levels are degraded in a number of our areas. In the specialized areas, of course, you'll see that play out in clearance rates and the like, and as well as proactive arrests. So we're going to see all those numbers trend downwards over time if we don't find the ability to resource that work.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any more questions? Yes, Board Member Spencer.
I want to really thank the team for the presentation in all of the areas, but I do have a few questions. I'll just state them all at once. Is that okay? I think that the thing that concerns me the most, and we've had, the different deputations and they've talked about the resources. So in one area it's mentioned the top-heavy retirement area. And also it's mentioned that there's going to be 3 cohorts of 120 in the training that's planned, upcoming. But I'm wondering how the training, how the training will work and the adequacy of the training to get the new cohorts up to speed for the areas that they will be backfilling essentially as they're trained, and then as the top-heavy retirement group leaves, how that will work, and especially with the impact of the budget, how that will work. So that's one area. And then also, if you could share some of the recent successes or improvements that we've seen in the Toronto Police Service based on our investment in staff resources, if you could share a few of those. And additionally, how does the current budget plan to further support and enhance our staff's capabilities, especially in the areas of the training? As I mentioned, I think training is critical and key in technology and in the mental health support. And then my other question, in light of the increasing demands on our police force, what are the proactive measures that are being taken in this year's budget to ensure that the officers are well equipped and supported? And could you elaborate on how these resources are contributing positively to officers' well-being and effectiveness, and how does that best practice compare in other leading Canadian cities?
The last question about wellness, I'm sorry?
Yes, yes.
Sure. I'll maybe start with the adequacy of the training. I think so. The fact that we have a very big cohort that are eligible to retire and then a younger workforce, what it speaks to is the middle that is actually shrinking. And one, I think being able to continue to have a strong pipeline so that you don't have gaps where you inadvertently don't even have enough strength to promote. We have overhauled our promotional process, and so understanding what the next gen will be needing in terms of leadership support, key attributes, characteristics is critical. We've put in place a Foundations of Leadership program. We've partnered with kind of an outside partner, but it is all to kind of build up to the degree we can as quickly as possible. Build leaders out of, ordinarily you may need to be in a rank, for 10, 15 years. You may not have that luxury when it comes to promoting. And so we are actively looking at what development do we need to make sure people are ready for supervisory positions to then mentor PCs and anyone that we're bringing, because this problem, we will continue to have younger and younger officers for the next couple years. So we have a foundations of leadership development. We also have an advanced foundation, an advanced leadership development through Schulich that we've partnered with, in addition to an extensive amount of in-house training through the police college. And so in terms of the adequacy of who we're hiring, that is provincially mandated. We exceed the provincial standards as it is. They go to OPC. Rather than just being deployed after that, they actually come back for an additional 6 weeks of training at the college. Plus, they have a number of weeks before they even go to the province for training. So that far exceeds what the minimum standard is in terms of their basic kind of constable training. And then they spend 9 months with a coach officer. Again, it's the importance of making sure you have senior people that can be coaches. But then they spend 9 months with a coach officer and in the community learning before they're truly put on their own. And that work still continues, and this budget still allows for that to continue. And then they have the annual refresher training, which is 3 days for every sworn officer. Again, exceeds the minimum standard for the province, but it's 3 days, and they go through updated scenarios based on the last year of events that would have happened. Again, reinforcing and making sure that the training is up to date and their skills are as up to date as possible. This budget still allows for that investment at the college to continue to be able to do that and exceed the provincial standard to make sure they're always ready. So I hope that sort of answers at least the first part around training and the importance of making sure they're deployable and adequately trained. Do you want to go to the recent successes?
So yeah, recent successes, we have re-envisioned how we handle fraud investigations. Frauds is one area that was depleted. Financial Crimes Unit was depleted a year, 2 years ago now to service other priorities. So we have re-envisioned how we do intake in that regard. We've centralized it, which has streamlined our approach on where our investigative efforts should be focused to be more responsive to where there are opportunities for investigative steps in financial crimes, that we're able to do so. And that's been done collaboratively across command lines. It's been very effective. I think there's a question around the investment over time this last year with getting our recruits in. We have very intentionally taken steps to take some of our specialized work, for example, the carjacking, and not draw from the front line, to allow for the recruits' deployment to have an impact on the radio call time, the pending time. We've been very intentional on that to make sure that there's a direct correlation, we know, with the number of officers available on the road to the amount of time it takes for us to respond when people are calling. So we're definitely making sure that as we identify the priorities that need resources, that we minimize our impact on frontline service delivery. But the improvement in getting people to do carjackings came at the expense of other areas of specialized work. So,
So maybe I'll move to the capabilities piece. So this budget, the submission will include civilian staff, in particular around the technology capability. So we have, and certainly the CIO can spend some time talking. Maybe I'll hand it to you before I move on to some of the other roles.
Yeah, I got a speaking part. That's lovely to be able to share this. I think what we're getting in the coming budget is a number of people to address the anemia we have in the IMIT teams, particularly the IT teams. So some of the successes we've had, the body-worn cameras, but really the evidence.com system, the consolidation of video evidence and making it easier for officers to collect it, use it, transfer it to courts. But there's a ton of process work that comes along with that, re-envisioning, rethinking, streamlining, engaging with the courts, the Ministry of Attorney General, in order to streamline all that. That's work that we haven't had a lot of practice at because we've been in reduction and cost-saving mode for upwards of a dozen years. So rebuilding that muscle and building that capability. The technology investments to date have been clearing the field, building an information management capability so that we think about information strategically, rationalizing our IT to get rid of a technology debt so that we're ready to move forward, building a modern digital capability through the platform and transformation project. All of those have been wins, but they're sort of the foundational, they're the footings that we need to lay. And we're now in a position to move forward much more aggressively with technology investments and getting the wins that are going to come from that. So thinking about officer notes going from paper notepads to electronic, being able to gather the data in a consolidated in a similar way across all investigations. Those are big wins that we're looking forward for, but we need those people that are going to, the civilians, the people who are going to help us re-engineer those programs and platforms. If we don't get it, the budget and the resources, I'm going to have to look very carefully at what we are still going to be able to do without incurring inordinate risk in the technology projects that we'd be undertaking. Thanks.
The only other thing I wanted to add is when we look back over the course of the last year and the investment in people, our call demand actually went up 18% during that same year. So while we haven't seen the change in pending time as much as we'd like to see positively, the degradation of service, that we're concerned about certainly would have been far worse had we not received the officers we did over the course of last year, given an 18% increase in calls for service. So while it's hard to draw clear direct lines, it's pretty clear that with that kind of rise in workload over the last year, had we not had the ability to hire and have more officers available on the front line, our call pending time would have been dramatically far worse than the bad number that it is today.
So the last piece was really around officer wellness and making sure they're supported. We have embarked on the last number of years on a sort of a whole wellness strategy, with the priorities being, injury prevention, immediate coordinated support, making sure our processes are well understood. We have people understand how to get access to care. For us, we see that as a minimum to be an employer of choice. We do want to be recognized in the sector as a healthy workplace leader. We're actually looking this next year to actually submit ourselves for some awards, just because we've put quite a bit of time and investment in that in the last number of years. And we're starting to now see some results. Again, hard to always draw the direct line, but we are starting to see things like the number of lost time days in a year. Those, from 21 to 22, and now we're seeing in 2023, those are down. Last year, they were down about 15 days in terms of absence time for our short-term leave. That is further, we know, down a little bit more again this year. We are seeing our mental health claims starting to level off. It doesn't mean the complexity of care has gone down, so you will see in the budget an increased cost for WSAB, but that's because for those that are off, there's still healthcare costs that are accumulating. However, the overall volume, certainly we're seeing leveling out and not increasing at the same rates pre-pandemic, which is encouraging. And so we're starting to see some metrics that suggest some of our proactive efforts are helping. And the chief now, with every cadet class, he has a session with them on what it means around taking care of yourself and wellness on the job.
Yeah, I do want to just highlight that a little bit. And some of the sad lessons learned in policing, frankly. The Ontario Provincial Police had a year, a number of years ago, where they lost many members by suicide. And the coroner convened an expert panel and examined the issue of suicide within policing. And there's a number of factors, of course, but burnout is one of the factors. And when we look at the state of the lean nature of our organization, when I became chief, it's very clear to me that I had a responsibility to do everything I could to ensure the health and wellness of our members, particularly around mental health. So to that end, I meet with every single recruit class, and I actually share with them my personal journey and my personal experiences as it relates to working in a stressful environment, mental health, self-care. And I asked them to consider a commitment to their own self-care. And you will have heard me speak of it during the graduations. And it's been, I think, a very important step forward organizationally, as well as we decentralized access to our wellness unit. We now have 3 areas where members can access wellness services across the city. All we do is try to break down any barriers to accessing the care they need, particularly recognizing that as we in the policing community are struggling at times due to the workload, due to some of the negative toxicity around policing, the increasing burdens we place on our members, that member wellness and looking after themselves is a key imperative for us. So both our wellness units done great work, and certainly the command team's committed to advancing that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions of either the command team or the board? Seeing none, before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I just want to thank, because I've seen how many folks that were in the community came out today, and I thank them for the deputations, but I also thank all those who came forward that were involved in the presentation or answering questions as it relates to the presentation, because I think it really was a very, very productive morning, and there were a lot of other discussions that happened as a result of that presentation that I think both clarified and you know, point us in the direction of where the service delivery has to be maintained and also to expand. So given that, if there are no other comments or questions, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Nadine, seconded. I don't think we need a second, but Lisa seconding. So thank you very much. And the next meeting, I believe, is December 12th. Correct. Of the budget meeting. Thank you.